Hey, John here. This video covers 4 years of my life working and renovating this house I bought back in 2019. Very long and complicated journey, but where to begin? I should probably start with how I got here and how I ended up acquiring this house. Because originally, I wasn't even planning on returning back to my birth country of Czechia, since I haven't lived here for nearly 2 decades. But then, after unsuccessfully obtaining the E2 investor's visa, I also failed to get back to States by jumping the Mexican border. I still needed to somehow restart my real estate endeavor. I covered this story in my previous videos. Since I wasn't able to get back to the States, I needed a new home. But I had no idea where my future home's gonna be. After a long time spent living in USA, I needed to adapt to a completely new way of living. I've been considering settling down in southern Spain, but then I decided I should probably play it safe since I didn't have much funds available. So I flew back to Czechia. I bought yet another used vehicle, 2015 Volkswagen Passat with like million miles on it, found a temporary and cheap accommodation, and started conducting search for my future project house. After my relocation, I needed to restart my life, needed to give my life a purpose again, and after all these fails, I needed a solid redemption. Immediately upon my return back in June 2019, I started sifting through the listings throughout the entire country and narrowed my search to just a few properties, which I then viewed. After seeing about 5 houses, I figured that this house is probably gonna be my best choice. Simple rectangular structure with gable roof, which gave me some options right from the start. However, the property been neglected pretty bad. The house was plain nasty with musty smell coming from moldy walls and floors. It was immediately apparent that there is a moisture problem coming from down below. The basement was full of standing water and there were holes dug up for sump pumps to take care of it. This damp basement recalled some memories back from my last house in America. But it wouldn't matter to me in what current shape the house is because I was gonna overhaul everything anyway. The worse looking house, the better for me, and cheaper too. When I looked past the ugly, I saw plenty of potential in this house. There was another investor interested in this property that called the agent before me, and I had to wait for his decision. There was still a 50-50 chance that I might not get it. But that investor backed out and I put down a deposit and signed the purchase contract in late June 2019. And then over another 3 months later, in early November, the house was all mine. After paying for the house, I only had left about $150,000, which needed to cover not only the renovation expenses, but also my living expenses and bills. I also needed to purchase all the tools because when I came here, I obviously had none. I owned nothing. All my belongings fit in one duffel bag, so I still figured I should be able to pull it off with the amount of money I had. But at that time, I had no idea what I'm getting myself into yet, with all the code requirements regarding the thermal insulation or a building permit. In the beginning, I didn't know what I'm actually gonna make out of this house. From the time of signing the contract, I had about 3 months to figure it out. I just knew I had a rectangular house with some potential, but I didn't know what I'm actually gonna do with it. Formerly, the house been laid out as a duplex, but then the most recent owner, who by the way died of alcohol abuse related disease in his 40s, together with his wife, yes, they both died, turned one of the units into auto repair shop. Half the house served as a residence and the other half as an auto repair shop. Unfortunately, they never finished their renovation. The interior dimensions of the rectangle were about 10.5 by 23 meters, which is about 35.5 by 75.5 feet. I figured that if I tear all the walls down, I'll end up with very generous space that I can do pretty much anything with. After realizing the actual size, I told myself that I'm really gonna build something from scratch in here. But I didn't know what that something should be yet. Is it gonna be a single residence or a duplex again? Then I thought I still have that attic space under that gable roof that can also be converted into a living space. So maybe I can even fit 3 decent sized condo units in here. Then ideas just kept pouring in. Suddenly I saw everything clearly. I'm gonna convert this building into a triplex, sort of like 3 townhouses. So I started sketching out the layout and I started calling around to find me an architect who would transform my plans into a blueprint to apply for a building permit. And here starts a journey that never ended because the architect I chose never actually finished the application and never obtained the building permit for me. It's been a drag for years till I finally gave up on the building permit sometimes during the renovation process. And I really wanted to have it all legit. This guy proved to be really sloppy and slow. Everything is wrong right from the get-go, ever since the first person I ever hired to work on this project. The Ministry of the Environment would reimburse me for roughly 50% of the total expenses for thermally insulating the entire house. And I certainly didn't want to miss on this opportunity to receive a free money. So I went ahead and hired another specialist who would prepare this complicated application for it. This is something that cannot be self-prepared. Alright, so I started getting ready to work. I went on a shopping spree and bought all sorts of battery-powered tools. I ordered all of it off of the German Amazon because the power tools are overpriced in Czechia. I bought a brand new DeWalt nail gun, impact gun, drill, jackhammer, a Bosch laser level, etc. I started stacking up. And then the day I've been waiting for so long has finally come. I finally have a project to work on. It is time to start the redemption process. My life has a purpose now. On November 6th, I got the keys, bought a weed eater, rented a chainsaw, and started trimming the overgrowth and cutting down the trees. The interior plan's been drawn by now, so I already knew what it's gonna look like. I knew what needed to be done. I wanted to start working on the house ASAP, but the architects still haven't applied for the building permit at this point. And I was afraid that if I start the works without it, I'll get reported by the neighbors and I'll get fined by the authorities and ultimately I'll be forced to shut down the project. The neighbors' relationships is a whole another story. When I first started working on the house, the community chief approached me expressing some doubts about my project the neighbors had. They've been afraid I'm turning this house into a welfare housing that'll be drawing in some problematic individuals. See, the house is placed in one of the oldest coal mining colonies established there in 1800s by some wealthy Polish coal baron. Since then, the coal mine's been out of service for a long time, but the housing remained, surviving the world wars and regime changes. These houses been then sold cheap to the first private owners and then exchanged hands or been inherited a couple more times before the current residents settling in. And all these people now wanted to know what are my intentions with this house. Alright, so despite not having the building permit yet, I decided to kick it off because the time been ticking and winter been approaching. I needed to get things moving, thinking that eventually I'll have that permit on hand, and if any disputes arose, I'll deal with them accordingly. So I hired me a helper that I met at the dormitory I've been staying at, and I paid him 150 Czech crowns, which was about $7 an hour. He was a 53 years old unemployed alcoholic who needed money for booze. And on November 13th, we started the works by disassembling the structures and clearing the junk clogging the backyard. For this junk, I rented my first little dumpster, but it filled up quickly and I realized I'm gonna need a lot bigger one. Lots of scrap metal been generated after tearing down all the sheds, which been quickly collected by locals or gypsies who took it to scrapyards for cash. At least I didn't have to worry about it. For the rest of the junk that couldn't get traded for cash, I rented an enormous dumpster. Simultaneously with clearing the yard, the interior walls demolition started as well. I'm not wasting time waiting for the permit. The architect still had no clear answer for me. The freezing temperatures were coming and concrete and mortar mixing will soon be impossible. I needed to find a crew for the demo, and after calling several contractors, I opted for a gypsy crew. Contractors been either booked for months ahead or too expensive, and the gypsy gave me a better estimate. At the time I thought I was saving lots of money, but in the end I would probably get even because I still had to pay for the backhoe loader rentals and loading and hauling debris to a recycling plant. In addition, I also paid for a loader with operator for finishing clearing the debris, who also broke up and dug up lots of concrete out of the ground. The demolition progress been very inconsistent because the gypsy boss brought different head count each time they showed up. I've been also pitching in because I was getting frustrated by the slow progress. At one point I really had to put some pressure on him to bring enough people to wrap it up quickly. And eventually he brought over about 15 gypsies and cleared it all out. All the interior walls been torn down and all the junk, bricks and lumber been removed from the attic. During the process, there was a couple of scary moments. At one occasion, one of the heavy brick chimneys fell off the roof due to improper demo procedure and broke one of the rafters. Other times they didn't pay attention when tearing down the load-bearing walls, and some of the main beams got loosely displaced and needed to either get supported or cut off so they don't move the roof out of its place by levering improper weight distribution. But the scariest moment by far was when the backhoe operator tried to tear down one of the adjacent entrance addition skeleton. The structure wouldn't separate from the wall and the whole gable wall flexed with it when he hit it with the bucket. Luckily, the wall's integrity wasn't compromised and the house didn't collapse, so it's all good. The safety was not on the agenda. My personal helper's been also helping with the demolition, doing different tasks such as knocking off the old and moldy stucco or helping moving debris to the dumpsters. About 3 weeks later, the first week of December, the demolition was completed and I could move on to another tasks. First thing I needed to take care of was the damp bottom. The hydro insulation was either not present at all or was compromised, and the moisture from the ground been percolating through the foundation walls to the walls above ground. I've done some research regarding this issue online and I found a solution that's been commonly used here in this part of the world. There are many old brick houses wet from the bottom, so a solution for this problem been developed. This solution lies in driving these corrugated stainless steel plates into the walls in between the bricks. The metal plates then physically separates the capillaries, which stops the moisture from percolating upwards. The negative side effect of this job was that it caused lots of additional damage to already brittle walls that needed to get repaired afterwards with mortar. Having the house's bottom properly protected against the moisture is fundamental. I searched for a specialized contractor for this job online. The estimates differed widely. Then I chose one that would do it for about half the price than the rest, and in the end the total cost was about $4,000. Those plates been jacked in around entire perimeter except the future door openings. The job was completed on time and without issues on December 10th. Nice and knowledgeable guys. Thankfully, the winter was coming in slow and temperatures remained within the limits for mixing the mortar for brick repairs and concrete pouring. So immediately after the plates been installed, I had the floor leveled with concrete on December 13th. You see, because of the mining activity in the past, the house sunk unevenly just like all the other houses here, and the height difference between south and north end was about 8 inches, which I needed to get taken care of before erecting the walls. I had the concrete pour done by some local contractor. At the time of the pour, I thought everything went well, but it wasn't until some time later when I realized that the whole slab cracked in many places. I've done some research on what caused it to crack, and I came to a conclusion that one crucial mistake was made. One important step been skipped, which is that when pouring concrete in an enclosed area where the material can't expand, the expansion gap is needed around the perimeter. This is achieved by wrapping the perimeter with a foam filler liner. Because the liner was not present, the concrete started cracking and lifting up by the expansion pressure. I considered this mistake as a big fail and was pretty angry that the concrete contractor never suggested that the liner should be in place. This could be easily prevented by quickly wrapping the perimeter during the pour. However, this concrete slab was not structural and its sole purpose was to just level the sloping house's floor. I should still be able to even it out by the floor styrofoam insulation and another layer of floating concrete slab that would go on top of it. So no harm done and I could proceed with framing the walls. We also deleted the opening leading to the basement from the west side and filled it with bricks. That needed to get done in order to be able to weld the moisture barrier over it concrete and then the hole gets filled with dirt. On December 17th, I had the wood delivered for the new interior framing structure. After the concrete pour, I hired another crew to prepare the door openings. All the openings needed to get resized and repositioned. New headers needed to get installed too. Again, I found this brick mason crew online and it wasn't going smooth. It's been really painful to watch them work. They started installing the prefabricated headers horizontally instead of vertically, and they started bending under the weight of the supported wall. Things been falling and collapsing. They mispositioned some of the headers even though I drew lines on the walls for them with the spray paint. They missed one of the headers completely. I paid them some advance money and they never came back to finish the job, so I had to actually do it myself. I made the cutouts and knocked the bricks out. Then, with the help of my helper, we repositioned the missed header. After that, I finished reinforcing all the brittle bricks by adding some more mortar and filled all the holes. Preparing the door openings, repairing the headers, filling the gaps, pouring the thresholds, and repairing all the damaged brittle bricks took well into January 2020. It felt like this stage is never going to end. So much work, mixing mortar all the time, smoothing out and straightening the openings, making them all evenly plumbed and leveled. This job's been wearing me out. My back hurts, my carpal tunnels are killing me to a point that I can't sleep at night from the excruciating pain. But I had to keep going. I just started working and there is a lot more work to come. Plus the freezing winter is coming. The openings had to be ready by January 21st because that's when the installation of the new doors been scheduled for. On January 5th, I started drilling holes through the concrete floor down to the basement for the new sewer pipes. I rented a big powerful drill with diamond drill bits and I drilled 17 holes over the weekend. During drilling the very first hole, the freaking leg broke off the drill stand and I had to improvise by supporting the stand with pieces of wood to keep it leveled and usable for drilling all the remaining holes. I wasn't able to swap it for another stand. Despite the broken stand, I was able to drill all the holes I needed, except 5 holes that's been covered by the stacks of delivered wood that I'll need to get to later after the stacks of wood are relocated. Drilling the holes took very long time and I almost didn't make the return. I drilled late into the Sunday night and I had to get up at 4 a.m. on Monday morning, the day of the return, to finish it up. Upon returning the drill, the rental shop have not returned my deposit of $3,000 for that broken stand. Heated arguments exchanged either in person or phone or emails. I'm not paying anyone $3,000 for their broken tools. I contacted my bank and started a dispute. The bank conducted their own investigation into the fraud and approved my dispute. The bank backdrafted the funds from their account, resulting in having the drill and the diamond bits were rent-free. In mid-January, the new doors vendor informed me that the installation is going to get delayed for another week or so. I've been getting more and more nervous about having my $10,000 worth of wood stored in unsecured building and that I had to keep packing all my tools every day so they don't get stolen. The winter came, but weather stayed kind of warm, which allowed us to continue mixing mud and working. While my helper continued repairing the bricks, I started welding the asphalt sheet moisture barrier to the stainless steel plates that been jacked inside the walls to create continuous barrier over the corners. Then I primed sections of the floor where the future framed walls were gonna be erected at and welded strips of asphalt sheets over it too. After all the walls are built, the asphalt liner is gonna get stretched and welded over the entire floor, which should ensure that this 130 years old brick house is gonna be free of moisture percolating from the basement. And then I precisely measured out the layout of the future condo units with help of a laser and started cutting the first pieces of wood for the bottom plates. The doors went in on January 30th. However, they were not able to to install all 12 doors because they messed up all 3 kitchen doors. They assembled them incorrectly with a wrong opening direction. Instead of right-handed, they made them left-handed. And again, I got into a dispute over something. They started blaming me for providing a wrong information instead of apologizing for the delay and inconvenience. They wanted to charge me additional $1,000 for making new doors, but I stood my ground because I was 100% sure that I provided correct information to the template guy who drew everything down 2 months prior. The mistake was done on their end when they converted the information from the sketch to the computer and then to the contract which I signed without noticing the wrong data. So I urged them to find the original sketch. Eventually they found it and remade the doors for me with no extra charge, but still have not apologized to me. While I was waiting for the missing doors to get installed, I continued framing the first floor layout. I started erecting first walls and building rooms in condo number 1 and 2. On February 9th, we started cutting out the existing old timber beams that actually held the roof together. For that purpose, I bought a bunch of tie-down straps and strapped the bottom of the rafters together, because I've been afraid that they might spread out of place after the connecting timber beams gets cut out. I needed to get rid of them beams to make room for floor joists framing the upper floor. Then the upper floor walls would support the rafters and the tie-downs would be removed. Honestly, I had no idea if that strategy was gonna work, if the straps are actually doing anything, if they would actually hold the roof together and really prevented it from collapsing in case the rafters really started spreading apart. But I had no other choice than to take my chances. I trusted my instincts and in the end it all worked out. After cutting the beams out in sections, we could proceed in framing the upper floor. Good thing about having this old roof above our heads was that we could work in dry conditions every day, not depending on the weather outside. On Valentine's Day, the door installation been finalized and I could finally relax that my house is now locked and secured and my wood won't get stolen and I don't have to pack every single little hand tool every time I leave the property. Ironically, just 5 days after installing all the doors, including temporary garage doors that's been secured by padlocks, the house really did get broken into and about $3,500 worth of wood and tools been stolen. Which is really blowing my mind because till that moment the house been all wide open and unsecured with all the unfinished openings and nothing got touched. But once the doors been installed and the garage door been locked, some douchebags decided to snap the padlocks off and steal my stuff. That is some bad luck. They must have pulled in with a car and a trailer or a big van because they stole about 20 pieces of 16 feet long 2x8s, my long ladder and some boxes with all my expensive diamond drill bits, laser tape measure and bunch of other small tools that I had to then repurchase. And of course, because of that unfortunate event, I was short on wood and I had to reorder that too. Interestingly, nobody saw nor heard anything that early morning when I asked thy neighbors, which is weird because those burglars must have made some noises when loading these heavy and large objects. I guess even none of the neighbors' dogs been barking as they usually do. So I called the police, filed a report, and they took fingerprints and DNA samples. They took my DNA too to eliminate me from whatever they might find. I haven't actually believed they might catch 'em thieves, but some few months later they actually did. I've been told by the detectives that by the time they identify the burglars, they have already been serving time in jail for some other crimes. Of course, I never saw my stuff again, but at least there was some sort of satisfaction by identifying the bad guys. After this event, I purchased a number of Wi-Fi cameras and installed them on my house for monitoring to feel safer. I asked my neighbor across the street if I could connect to his Wi-Fi network because I had no electricity at the site yet. But this little hiccup couldn't slow me down, and we continued building up the two condos. We built the middle wall upstairs and braced it so it could then serve as a roof support up at the ridge, and the tie-down straps were free to get removed. Then all the remaining wood been relocated so I could finish framing the third condo. On February 29th, I rented the big drill again, but this time from different rental company, and I drilled the remaining holes to the basement for the plumbing. And guess what? The security deposit was only about $250, not $3,000 like the previous place. I told them about my negative experience with the other rental place, and they said they would never treat the customer with such arrogance. Then we continued building the third condo downstairs. We cut out all the remaining old timber beams and then framed upstairs so the whole roof can now get supported in its entire length as soon as possible. On March 9th, I was able to remove that hideous dormer. That dormer was a real eyesore. I wanted to make the house look clean and symmetrical, so the dormer had to go. My helper's attendance been gradually getting worse due to alcohol consumption. Once he started getting regular paychecks from me, he started drinking regularly again. I was able to get him to work only 3 times, sometimes just 2 times a week. He's been driving me nuts because he made it hard for me to plan the works ahead. That day he's complained about backache from all the hard work, so I drove him back home and finished tearing down the dormer all by myself. Then I also put temporary frame in place to support the tarp in case it rains. And of course it rained that night, so I was glad I didn't give up and actually covered it up because I was pretty beat up myself too. The same day, early in the morning at about 1 a.m., one of my security cameras actually have recorded some individuals snooping around my house looking through my garage door to see what could get stolen. After removing the dormer, a new rafters needed to be put in place and the open section then being covered with reused boards during the following days when weather permitted. The spring was coming. I've been anticipating the winter weather to hit, but it never really did. The winter was really mild. It never snowed heavily and the temperatures never fell too low either. Thanks to this weather, we've been able to do all these jobs, including the roof now. So throughout March, I continued working on the roof. The rafters been doubled up across the entire roof span to reinforce it. The existing rafters been spread out pretty far apart, plus some of them were gonna get cut out to make room for the new skylight windows. So some reinforcements needed to be added. For those new rafters, I ordered some more timber beams and I also used some leftover floor joists. Also, the chimney holes been boarded up. And then sometimes during this time, the COVID struck. This pandemic became real nuisance with wearing the masks all the time, full lockdown been ordered and all stores been closed, including the supply stores. I remember that very well because I wasn't able to order any materials as a private buyer. Because I don't possess any business license, I needed to ask my neighbor to use his to be able to continue purchasing materials, like this roof insulation I needed to put up before I start framing the additional support structure. Alright, so during these worst COVID times, the works needed to continue. First, I needed to continue working on the roof, so I stopped all the leaks. The old sheet metal been stripped down and new felt been rolled out and batten grit installed for supporting the future ventilated metal roof. I finished protecting the roof by April 2nd. But it still needed a lot more work later on with straightening the batten grit because the old roof was all crooked. On April 10th, I finished building my first stairs in the middle condo, which took me about 3 days. Finally, I was able to get up and down the upstairs without using the ladder, and I could haul supplies comfortably. As soon as the roof wasn't leaking anymore, I was able to fill the insulation in between the rafters. I needed to do this step prior finishing framing the additional roof support frame that was gonna serve dual purpose. One, it would add thickness for additional layer of insulation. Second, it would furthermore improve the overall rigidity of the roof. It would also solve my framing dilemma around the future skylights. I decided installing this additional subframe on the go ago, so I had some more additional wood delivered for that later. It took me a while to figure out how I'm actually gonna build up this roof supporting frame. So what I did was sort of like an upside down framing where I actually built the framing from the top to the bottom. So I bought these 8-meter long 2x7s, which are about 26 feet long, so they span in one piece over the width of each condo unit. I nailed it across directly to the rafters. I certainly added some weight to the rafters and they might have sagged down a little bit. That's why I also needed to do this step before actually straightening the battens on top. So by using these long boards, I created this additional sturdy grid underneath the rafters. And only after then I could frame the remaining walls upstairs and anchor the top plates to it to finalize the roof support. Basically, the entire roof structure is now supported by a wall roughly every 12 feet. It ain't going nowhere. Simultaneously with working on the roof, I also had some people working around the house during April. I had another gypsy crew to start digging a trench around the house to reveal the foundation walls. This job was part of the moisture proofing improvements. The asphalt liner needed to get welded onto the walls underground in order to lower the level of moisture percolation. I'll never actually know if this attempt serves the intended purpose, but in case it doesn't, I'll live with better feeling that I've done what I could to reduce the dampness in the basement. So for a very long time it looked like a war zone around the house, holes in the ground, and I kept tripping over piles of dirt everywhere. After the walls been revealed, I borrowed powerful pressure washer from my neighbor and washed the dirt off to see clearly the damage caused by the elements. I needed to have all that repaired before the asphalt liner goes on, so I hired another crew of brick masons to smooth the walls out. With those guys it was also difficult to work with. I accidentally overpaid them because I made mistake in the calculations and they took advantage of it and didn't come back to finish the job. So again, I had to finish repairing the foundation walls by myself. Same with the gypsy crew that I hired for digging the trench. I paid them half the money for the job they done and they never came back to finish it up. Again, I had to put in my effort to dig, re-dig after rain a couple more times because of the delays, and then backfill it after I finished welding the asphalt liner. Okay, back to the roof. By the end of April, I had all the inside roof supporting structure ready. I believe that by this time I no longer had a helper because I fired him. Then I finally framed up the rest of all the supporting walls, and after the entire roof was secured and supported, I was able to start straightening the battens on top. Things looked promising that I could have the house finished by the end of the year 2020 and I could put the condos up for sale. By May 6th, I had the west side all straightened up and I started installing the skylights while keeping an eye on them other people. I've never installed any skylights before and now I had 12 of them to do. First I thought I'm gonna hire an installer, but then I realized that I'd better do it myself since the roof is awkwardly tilted thanks to the earlier mining activity. I needed to perform lots of measuring so everything looks optically straight, but in reality it wasn't. So I started cutting out the first hole and as soon as I had it cut out, it started raining. Dealing with the weather was a daily struggle. I've been constantly switching between working inside and outside depending on weather conditions. During rainy days I've been framing, during sunny days I've been digging or roofing. Installation of the skylights started slow, but soon I had a system figured out and on May 11th I had all 6 skylights on the west side of the roof installed. Problem was that during re-straightening the battens I rarely hit the same screw hole and the felt is now leaking in many places every time it rains. In addition, it's also leaking around the skylights now. So every time it rained, I had to keep monitoring the situation and repositioning the buckets and used food trays and vinyl covers till the day the sheet metal gets installed. The way I've done the battens was pretty complicated, time-consuming procedure. I needed nice flat base for the new sheet metal so everything looks brand new and pretty. I added a total of 1200 little shims and blocks of different height under each batten where crossing the counter batten. Time-consuming task wearing my ankles, knees, wrists, my whole body out while jumping up and down the roof for 30 days straight. By May 29th, I had the other half of the roof, the east side, straightened up too, and remaining 6 skylights installed as well. I also finished reinforcing and straightening out the sides, the fascias and rakes. Then I had the new sheet metal delivered and the roofing crew been scheduled for June 9th. The works around the foundation walls perimeter also continued throughout May. Because them gypsies had no idea how to weld the asphalt liner on the wall and burned one of my new doors with that torch, I had to take over welding the liner myself, which was also very hard and time-consuming work. I needed to have as much of it done as possible before the roofing starts, so the roofers don't need to be tripping over piles of dirt when getting up and down the ladder. I pushed them gypsies to backfill the trenches faster, but they never finished it. Before the trenches been backfilled though, I also laid down a new proper grounding strip as a part of the new electrical installations around the entire perimeter, and also a French drain pipe been laid down. Only after then it could get backfilled with dirt and compacted. However, I wasn't able to finish it on time because of these delays, and the roofers been tripping over piles of dirt anyway. On June 9th, the roofing crew showed up but only installed drip edge and gutter on one side. Then another day they again installed only drip edge and gutter on the other side and some more sheeting on the rakes. I wasn't too happy with the result because none of the gutter hooks been installed straight. I had to show them how bad it looks from the bottom, and they only repaired few of the worst ones. They passed on redoing the rest, saying that no one will ever notice. Then they came back on June 15th to cover the rear west side of the roof, and then the next day, June 16th, they covered the front east side. And again, I had a dispute with the crew leader, this time about the way they cut the sheet metal around the skylights. They created uneven gap on each side of the skylight windows on the west side. Unfortunately, I noticed it too late to redo it, so I pressed on it to make sure that this doesn't happen again on the front of the house. I at least needed the roof on the front of the house appear visually pleasing. So the roof is now finally finished and it's not leaking anymore, and I don't have to keep driving back here every time it starts raining at night to reposition them used food trays and buckets. The following day after the installation, I noticed some more uneven cuts and bends, but there's nothing I could do about it now. I'm just trying to ignore it, telling myself that I just need to lower my expectations when hiring a contractor. I just need to believe that these fuck-ups won't be a deal breaker for the buyers. While I've been waiting for the roofers, I maintained my pace at working around the perimeter foundation walls. I continued smoothing the walls, repairing holes, priming and welding the asphalt liner. Every time it rained, the dirt kept sliding back in the trench and I needed to redig it. During these rainy days, I worked inside on some more framing, still naively waiting for the building permit. I built a staircase in condo number 1 on June 4th and 5th, and then June 17th and 18th I built the last stairs in condo number 3. I continued finishing the framing around the skylights and also needed to install vapor barrier in the attic. Throughout June, I continued finishing all the framing in condo number 1, getting it ready for the plumbing and electrical installations. I finished installing the attic ceiling joists, finished the low walls below skylights, where I also needed to first fill the cavities with roof insulation and covered it with vapor barrier before I could frame those. I'm pulling some low voltage wires through the framing to the skylight windows for powering the motorized opening function. Then I'm filling in all the cavities and gaps with another layer of thermal insulation. The roofer came back on June 23rd to install the vent chimneys for sewer and bathroom ventilation combined with kitchen hood extractors. On June 30th, I'm redigging the trenches again on the north side foundation walls so I can finish the goddamn hydro insulation and French drains to help getting rid of the standing water in the basement. Summer is here and it's getting hot. By July 5th, I finally have east, west and north foundation walls all treated with asphalt liner. I can now finally finish laying down the rest of the French drains for diverting the groundwater away. Then backfilling the trenches with dirt and run jumping jack compactor over it. I haven't done the south side yet because I still had some work to do in there. I needed to bring the sewer pipes out the house and hook them up to the public sewer, reposition the main water supply pipe, and also connect all the French drains to the sewer together with the rainwater from the downspouts. For that reason, I needed to rent a mini excavator again and dig a large hole on the south side. After the hole been dug out, I was gonna finish repairing the foundation walls and finish welding the asphalt liner too. And the hookups for the downspouts were ready as well. Then I rented that mini excavator and jumping jack again for finishing the backfill. During backfilling, I also laid down pipes for diverting the downspout water to the city sewer lines. One of my good neighbors, Peter, offered a helping hand to save me some time getting in and out the excavator. Then I used the excavator to level and grade the entire yard around the house. In order to be able to do that, I needed to get rid of the remaining piles of trash first. I rented another dumpster in which I loaded everything I couldn't burn. I burned all the wood I had piled up to save money on landfill fees. Then I needed to get rid of the piles of gravel too. One of the piles was used over the French drains and the other pile I hauled down to the basement to elevate the ground level a few inches to cover up the standing water. I opted for this solution because I wanted to eliminate the need for using the sump pumps, so elevating the surface seemed like a good idea. I had the mini excavator rented for an entire week, and during that week I completely transformed the front and backyard finally to nearly finished condition. But it still needed some finishing by hand though, so I spent several days later on by raking and cleaning debris that's been spread out by the excavator and buried under the surface. Then I fertilized the newly flat yard, spread the grass seeds, and just watched it grow, turning the yard from being cluttered by all sorts of buildings in the past to just piles of debris and dirt and trash to a smooth and green surface was the most satisfying feeling. It finally looks as a place where you would wanna live and raise a family. Then I dug that big hole for connecting all the plumbing and finishing building the basement access shaft in a place where the old staircase used to be at the south side. During that week spent with an excavator rental, I did whatever I could. There is still remaining a large pile of different sizes of some sort of concrete debris that's been dug out the ground before. I still needed to have that hauled away at some point. During August, I continued working depending on the weather again, so I worked inside when I couldn't work outside. On the inside, I stretched and taped vapor barrier onto the roof in condo number 1 and installed drywall metal frame on top of it. It's getting really hot while working inside under the roof during the summer, making me all sticky, sweaty, and exhausted. On the outside, I started building the basement access shaft, which I finished on August 12th. For finishing building that, I used some blocks that I filled with concrete, and I reused some of the old bricks for the rest. For that shaft opening, I reused some of the old concrete curb blocks that I picked from that pile of concrete debris. On August 17th, I rented a big drill with diamond bits again for bringing the sewage pipes outside the house. The reason there are 3 separate pipes is that according to the original plan, there were supposed to be buried 3 separate septic tanks in the ground under the parking lot. However, at the last moment before ordering those, I learned that within 2 years the city is going to be connecting this street to the public sewer utility network. So I figured it makes no sense for me to invest in 3 septic tanks anymore. I joined those 3 pipes together and went right ahead and connected them illegally to the existing stormwater shaft, which was then later connected to the sewer network. Once I had the drill with me, I also used it for drilling some more holes for the main power connections and natural gas connections. Then I continued outside connecting all the plumbing so I can finally backfill the big hole. I also needed to repair the stormwater shaft for properly securing the lid because it got damaged during excavation. On August 26th, I had the same mini excavator delivered again and finished backfilling the big hole around the basement access shaft, finally covering all the plumbing hookups. I also wanted to prepare the parking lot for paving, but unfortunately I didn't have enough time to do so. I asked for extending the excavator rental for a couple more days, but they had it booked at that time, so I missed missed the window of opportunity for preparing the parking lot, which I wasn't able to get back to until 2 years later. By the 1st of September, the summer suddenly ended and the rainy season started. It's been raining every day and I wasn't able to finish raking the backyard on time. Time was of the essence because I needed the grass seeds to germinate before cold temperatures comes. Also, the cash been running out faster than I planned, and I needed to start control the cash flow more closely and strategize what jobs I can afford to have done by the contractors. Oh, and yeah, I still don't have that building permit. Despite the delays and setbacks, the progress looked promising. If everything was going like this, I should be able to put the first condo for sale sometimes in spring 2021. I've been aiming for February. Back in summer, I started searching for the insulated stucco facade contractor. Finding one was a challenge because they've been all booked up till next year. But after many phone calls, I was able to find one who was available to start working on my facade by the end of September, claiming that they'll have my facade done by the end of October. That was pretty good deal, I thought. I was excited that I found a contractor that'll take care of me, and very soon my house is going to look entirely different. Alright, so at that time I felt pretty satisfied with the progress and everything regardless. I felt positive and excited that soon I'll be selling and cashing out on my efforts. My application for a subsidy for insulation been approved. All I needed for cashing out the subsidy now was to wait for the facade install final invoice. I also needed to finalize the interior insulation, but because I was running out of cash, I wasn't quite sure if I'll be able to afford it, and I figured it'll be probably safer for me to just exclude the interior insulation out the application. I've been rushing to have everything ready for the facade installation. I needed to delete the garage door opening, so I filled it with bricks. I added the moisture barrier underneath the bricks too. I hauled those big bricks in my facade. I also needed to have the natural gas connections distributed to each condo separately and have separate gas meters installed. The gas hookups is something I haven't covered in this video yet, but I started working on this part of the puzzle back in spring. I've searched for a contractor who would run all the gas pipes to the condos for me because this is something I couldn't do myself. It needs to get done by a certified contractor. The first thing I needed to apply for was the gas line relocation with the natural gas distributor. So I applied for having the main gas shutoff valve relocated from the curbside to the facade back in May and started searching for a gas contractor. The facade contractor recommended me his uncle who owned a heating and plumbing company, so eventually we worked it out together. Alright, so the facade contractor kept postponing the start of the job for another 4 weeks, which made me pretty frustrated because I thought that by this time the facade will be finished. Also, while I was sealing the vapor barrier tapes around the doors, I noticed all them doors being installed incorrectly. Not only they were not plumb, but also the frames been bowing inward. So this was the second time I dealt with this company regarding the installation. So I called it in and claimed having it repaired under warranty. The representative came over and straightened up some of the worst crooked frames. The frames bent inward due to expanding insulating spray foam that's been sprayed inside the cavities between walls and the door frames during installation. Throughout October, while I was waiting for the facade installation, I continued working inside. I finished installing all the steel framing for drywall. I installed all the sewer plumbing and brought it down to the basement. Then I installed all the venting from bathrooms and kitchen and connected it to the roof vent chimneys. I also pulled through all the PEX plumbing for tap water and heating and roughed in all the tub and shower faucet valves. The built-in toilet flush tank been also installed. All the electrical wiring went in too, including the network cables, TV and satellite, and built-in audio. I also installed conduit for concealing the TV and entertainment wires inside walls in living room and master bedroom. And finally, on October 21st, the facade install started. Originally, I thought I found someone reliable, someone I can count on, but on that day actually started my 1-year facade nightmare installation I covered in detail in one of my other videos. Okay, so this crew started messing it up from day one. They increased the thickness of the insulation for no reason. I had them tear down the first styrofoam blocks they attached to reduce it back to what it needed to be. They argued with me, coming up with all sorts of excuses why it is what it is, and reluctantly reduced it only sporadically, claiming knowing that that's the best they can do. After this incident, the installation continued very slow and sloppy. They kept starting late and leaving early. In over 2 weeks, they have not even been able to finish this one side of the house. So I was forced to start calling their boss, expressing my concerns about their work. But he simply stated that if I don't like the work, they can quit and I can go right ahead and try to find someone else. At that moment, I had no idea what I'm supposed to do. Should I let him go or have him continue? But then I decided, okay, fuck it. I don't like it when I'm being treated this way. I'll try to find someone else then. So I paid them off for the job they'd done and I fired them. I needed to have the facade done this fall, but here we are. It's November 11th and this crew is gone. I've been working on this house for exactly 1 year by now, and all that I'm left with is a half-assed job on the west side of the house, and now I need to start searching for another facade contractor. While they've been working on the facade, I continued working inside. On October 29th, I had a first load of drywall delivered and started hanging it up on November 1st. All the installations and insulation being completed by this time, including the plumbing insulation, main breaker box, and multimedia box. I bought a drywall lifting machine so I can do all the ceilings by myself too. It took me 3 weeks to hang the entire condo by myself. In the meantime, I kept searching for a new facade contractor, but it was a hard task. All of them are either booked for another year or they don't accept new jobs during winter. I'm fucked. Time is ticking and I want to list the first condo for sale already. So instead of having the facade done by the end of October, I now have no clue when my facade's gonna be up. But unbelievably enough, I found one contractor at last who was willing to work during winter when the temperatures are not too low. The estimate was about the same. My finances been running thin and I had just enough money left for this facade and maybe a couple more jobs. I've been spending the money at a faster rate than I thought, mostly thanks to all the extra jobs on the yard, basement waterproofing, and the roof. Also, the tri-pane insulated doors and skylights were very expensive. Only for those I spent about $22,000. Demolition was about $8,000, wood was about $20,000, plus all the fasteners, plumbing and electrical, drywall, tools, miscellaneous expenses, food, gas, my living expenses, all the gypsies, masons, my helper and other contractors like the roof contractor, and my $150K was nearly gone by now. Because I was running low on cash, I accepted a little job offer from my good neighbor Peter. He was gonna pay me for building a bathroom in his attic. This little extra cash should help me with my daily expenses and maybe purchasing some supplies for my house. So I started working there over the weekend on December 5th and 6th. I prepared and reinforced the floor frame and built some metal framing walls to separate the bathroom. On December 8th, the new facade crew started. Compared to the previous crew, they worked very fast. Again, I started feeling excited that I found a good contractor with great reviews who's gonna take care of my house, who's gonna take care of me, and I don't need to babysit them and worry about nothing. But boy, was I wrong again. They worked fast but also in very poor quality. Nothing was straight. There's humps and bumps. The front of the house is curved like a banana. And I expressed my concerns again. First to the workers, but my complaints been ignored, saying that nobody's gonna notice and work continued as usual. I'm getting tired of being told that no one's gonna notice. I'm noticing. I'm the goddamn customer. And I don't wanna have crooked house. So I started calling the office and I asked them to come over and inspect the progress, that I'm not satisfied with the way the facade is now all misshaped. So they came over and brought a stucco compound rep who's had absolutely nothing to do with the sloppy work, and they all informed me that this curved wall is within the tolerance. My brain is boiling at that point, but the work continued. During the facade installation, I was working on the inside trying to wrap up the drywall ASAP. While I was mudding and taping, one of the workers came up to me and complained that the corner of their styrofoam doesn't line up with the rake boards on the south side. And I told them before, I warned them that they need to make sure that the styrofoam lines up the same way it does at the opposite gable wall. But now the way they installed installed it, the styrofoam was actually overlapping over the rake by about half an inch. I was getting pissed because I knew this was gonna be very problematic to correct this. The thickness of the styrofoam needed to get reduced so it gets about quarter inch below the rake, not half inch over. So I called the office again, and they came over again and still been trying to convince me that everything is alright. There was absolutely no effort on their end to correct the issues. I couldn't believe this. They've been even asking for more advance money, and that was it. I've had enough. I couldn't tolerate their approach anymore, so I called them off. So after 11 days of this miserable performance, on Friday, December 18th, I kicked them out. I have no longer mercy with these contractors who don't give a fuck about the customer's satisfaction. So now I had to come up with some sort of solution on reducing the thickness of the entire south side gable wall by about 3/4 to 1.5 inches at the highest point in the middle. So I continued mudding, taping and sanding the drywall, which is an activity that I hate the most, but I needed to keep pushing because during that time I was also kicked out of dormitory. They went out of business and I needed to move out by the end of January. So as soon as I had the drywall done, I moved to the house on February 1st, 2021. At that time I had no running water in there yet, so I've been driving 10 miles once a week to a gas station to take a shower there. As for my laundry, I started going to a laundromat. To be able to use the toilet, I needed to finish the wastewater pipes connections in the basement. For flushing the toilet, I used just a bucket with rainwater collected from the gutters. My good neighbor Peter donated me some old bed with mattress, couple of desks and chairs he saved from being thrown away from his old workplace to furnish my new temporary accommodation. I moved in one of the upstairs rooms. For covering the floor, I used an old carpet I saved from the house's attic during demolition, and for heating my room, I used just a little electric fan heater. This winter was a lot colder than the last one, -17 up to -20 degrees Celsius. It snowed often, and we've had close to 2 feet of snow at times. Thanks to the cold temperatures, the drywall mud compound been drying up slow, even though I used a little gas heater and some fans. But this little propane gas heater was insufficient for the space volume. There was lots of humidity in the air from the mud, causing lots of water condensation on my skylight windows that kept running down the walls. Right after I moved in my house, I finished dressing up the door surrounds with particle boards and started working on the floors. I primed the concrete floor and welded the asphalt liner down to finalize the moisture barrier in this first condo. On February 6th, I started laying down the styrofoam blocks for the thermal insulation, which was part of my subsidy application too. When I started this installation, it wasn't going smooth. With this styrofoam, I also needed to even out the surface. The overlapping asphalt liner high points and the uneven concrete that bulged out thanks to the missing expansion gap around perimeter I mentioned earlier. At the same time, I needed them blocks be sitting solid on the floor so they don't flex. So I used combination of planer, saw, chainsaw and a hand grader to make the grooves and adjustments. I've never done it before and I'm aware it can be done better ways, like evening the surface by sand, but I wanted to try it without using the sand. The rest of imperfections and gaps I evened out and filled in with the spray foam. This technique created lots of mess. Styrofoam beads everywhere. I collected several big bags of it, but after 6 days of work I had it all done and straight and ready for rolling out the underfloor heating PEX pipes. On the outside, the winter's been at a full swing. I wasn't able to work on the facade, so I wanted to do as much as I could on the inside. On February 12th, I started installing the underfloor heating. I've never done this before either, so calculating the length of the separate circuits was a little tricky. I started with the master bathroom to get a hang of it, but then in the kitchen and living room I had some difficulties to achieve required length of the PEX pipe. This was a case of a miss and trial because there was no way to make a precise calculation. As a result, I had to redo the living room. I had to rip the pipe up and roll it again because it was getting too long. After 4 days crawling on my knees, fighting the pipe and pushing the hooks in the styrofoam styrofoam, I had all the rooms rolled out and the pipes connected to the main manifold. I figured out all the details and tricky parts, like between the door openings where the pipes need to be laid closer together to generate more radiant heat by the doors for eliminating the condensation. This first condo was like a testing condo for me, in which I figured everything out, and the remaining 2 condos should be just a smooth operation. By February 21st, I also had all 3 radiators installed upstairs in both rooms and a bathroom. Again, had some trouble with tightening the fittings that broke apart, which I had to then return and swap it for different kind. The floating concrete slab pour been scheduled on March 4th. Until then, I had nothing else to do inside condo number 1. So I moved over to the middle condo and worked on some framing around the skylight windows for a little bit till the weather cleared out. And then I finally went ahead and started that facade rescue mission, not knowing what I'm getting myself into yet at that moment. But I knew I had to just do it, figuring out everything on the go. I had to get it done so I could also finalize the subsidy application and cash out that free money. I bought thousands of expensive recessed anchors in shape of propellers for about $1,500 and started anchoring the styrofoam blocks to the walls. I drilled millions of holes. Sometimes it took up to 6 tries for a single anchor to find a solid brick underneath the styrofoam. During this activity, I discovered that about 30 blocks were not properly attached to the wall and they needed to get reattached. To be able to reach the high areas, I bought my own scaffolding for about $1,000 on February 27th. I didn't know for how long I'm gonna be needing it, so I figured it's gonna be much cheaper than renting it, and I could still sell it after I'm done. First, I erected the scaffolding at the north gable wall, which was already covered with styrofoam all the way up, and the surface didn't need as much adjusting by scrubbing, and I anchored all the blocks. After anchoring all the blocks, I started filling in all the holes and gaps with spray foam and scraped off the dried excess. Then I had to refill it again because the hole's been still hollow after the first attempt, and again I scraped off the excess. Eventually I got it done and I could finally see how successful I'll be with flattening the surface. I needed to practice it on this side of the house before I hit the worst sections. On March 4th, the concrete floor slab been poured and I ran out of cash. I had to opt for plan B, and the next day I was forced to sell my 2015 Volkswagen Passat. I bought an older minivan 2008 Renault Kangoo instead. This swap generated me some necessary cash for finishing all the facade repairs and other jobs to a stage at which I could list the first condo for sale. But because of this facade clusterfuck now, listing the condo in February is not happening as I planned before. I've been very frustrated by the fact that I'm repairing someone's work again. I'm repairing a work that should actually be the repair itself. I'm about to waste who knows how much time by fixing it and getting it ready for the stucco. On March 6th, I started trimming down the high points on the north side gable wall by scrubbing it by hand with styrofoam grater tool. By using 8-foot long level, I kept making sure the entire wall is flat. I've been creating lots of mess again. Styrofoam beads getting picked up by the wind and flying around the entire village. My neighbors must have loved me, but it wasn't my fault. I haven't been planning on this by any means. This wall wasn't as bad as the other side, so I was satisfied with the result after 2 days. And once I had this scaffolding up here, I decided that I should also decorate this otherwise boring wall. Many of these houses around here have these attic venting windows on gable walls, usually a set of 3. Even this house had these before, but I had them filled in with bricks before the styrofoam installation. I thought I should bring back the old house character, so the last minute before starting applying the reinforcing mesh, I've decided I'm gonna add a set of 3 arched windows surround like decorations cut out of styrofoam, and I installed them on March 12th. So I measured out the proportions, cut it out using my new hot wire saw and a blade, and glued it up. I've been pretty pleased with the outcome, and everyone passing by been complimenting on it. Then I measured out the thickness differences on the front, east side by the road, and I finally saw how badly is the wall curved and how badly were the corners out of plumb. Here it can be clearly seen after I marked the lines by the doors. I needed to trim the styrofoam down this much. I came up with a feasible solution that I was gonna carry out throughout the rest of the house. First, I straightened up the corners and then the bottom corner by hand. Then I trimmed grooves down the middle, and then I used a large drywall sander with a very coarse sandpaper to trim down the surface area between those lead points. Time-consuming, hand and shoulders destroying, painstaking work. Going back and forth over the same spots over and over with a level to make sure the surface is straight and flat and plumb. Square foot at a time till I had this side done by March 18th. Because the outside corners been so bad, I had to add a thin layer of styrofoam to even it out, and had them plumbed before I started applying the corner beads on the north side. The next day I applied a section of the reinforcing mesh. Then I continued working on the front. I filled in all the holes and gaps with spray foam twice, and also filled in the hollow areas where they cut out for the gas lines. On March 25th I started applying the corner beads on the front around all the doors, and then on March 26th I added some more mesh on the north side. Then I decided to decorate the front of the house too with some more arches with keystones above all the doors to add some old house character to it. So I measured out the proportions again, made a template, and then multiplied it by 6. I had it up in just one day on March 27th. The reinforcing mesh on the north side been finished on March 28th, and then I continued on the front of the house, which I got done 2 days later on March 30th. On March 31st I started correcting corners around the doors on the west side, the rear of the house. This side's been installed by the first facade contractor back in November last year, and the door opening's been done really bad. Out of plumb, out of level, different height too. I had to make lots of corrections by adding thin layers of styrofoam and more mud than I should to even things out. The spring came with warmer weather so I could work more comfortably, but occasionally it still snowed like on April 5th. After fixing the corners in the rear, I moved the scaffolding from north side to the south side, and on April 6th I started anchoring the blocks, and I also measured the thickness differences. During the following days I applied the same system to reduce the thickness of the entire area by about an inch by scrubbing and sanding. First I determined the corners left, right and bottom. Then from the bottom corner I carved in the grooves, and then I used the drywall sander with very coarse sandpaper again to trim down the rest of the styrofoam between them. I needed to bring the thickness of the styrofoam down so it doesn't overlap the rake. To help establishing the correct thickness, I also used the laser level for double checking. April's weather has been crazy. One moment it's sunny, next moment it's snowing again. I successfully leveled the midsection of the south side, and once I knew that everything lined up and I was really sure that I was able to fix the overlapping problem, I decided I'm gonna first finish the reinforcing mesh on the west side. Then I'm gonna finish installing the missing styrofoam blocks on top of the south gable wall, which the contractor didn't finish due to getting fired back in December. On April 12th, I'm working all the way up at the top. The next day, I also anchored them remaining blocks. By April 18th, I'm also done straightening the bottom section of the wall and filled in all the anchor holes and gaps with spray foam. On the rainy days, I've done some painting inside. So it took me about 2 weeks to fix this wall, never-ending, shoulders-destroying sanding and scrubbing, physically and mentally very demanding, exhausting job, running up and down the scaffolding and ladders. On April 20th and 21st, I took advantage of the good weather and applied the corner beads, the faux arch window surround decorations, and reinforcing mesh to the south side, which wraps up repairing the botched insulated facade installation done by previous 2 contractors. Then the weather turned bad for an entire week and I wasn't able to continue working outside, so I finished electrical inside. I finished installing all the switches and receptacles. I also did some drywall repairs and painting. I returned working back outside on April 26th. Weather is finally nice and warm, and I started working on finishing covering the bottom perimeter with styrofoam blocks. For this purpose, I used compressed styrofoam which doesn't absorb water from the ground. Finishing this part of the facade was technically very challenging because I needed to carve out holes for the basement vents and at the same time grooves for the gas line on the front of the house. Those styrofoam blocks then looked like some pieces of art from the backside. I needed to play with it a lot to even out the uneven basement walls too. The existing basement vents openings been located below ground level, so I figured I'm gonna split some scrap wastewater pipes and reroute those vents up underneath the styrofoam. I also cut out an opening for a future natural gas main valve hookup, which still has not been relocated yet at this time. After 11 months of bureaucracy, I still don't have the permit for the gas line relocation from the curbside to the house. And by the way, I still don't have the building permit either. This architect guy been useless in this department, but at least I used him to help me with drawing up the paperwork for the gas relocation application. By the end of April, I finished the bottom on the north side, and then in May, I continued ruining my knees and back applying styrofoam to the basement wall on the west side. Again, evening out the uneven foundation walls by carving out the styrofoam. In the meantime, I also finished some missing sections of the reinforcing mesh on the south side and the west side. On May 6th, the whole bottom perimeter was finally done and ready for the reinforcing mesh as well, which was completed on May 8th. After all the styrofoam blocks been attached, I needed to anchor them as well. I needed to make sure to carefully drill the holes above the moisture barrier so I don't damage its integrity. But one of the holes I drilled too deep under the threshold that I actually drilled through one of the underfloor heating pipes, and after I pulled the drill out, the water started squirting out the hole. At first I couldn't figure out where the water was coming from, but then I came to my senses and realized I actually drilled through the heating pipe in master bedroom, which now needed to get repaired. Alright, by this time I finally had the gas line relocation approved after 11 months of bureaucracy. After emailing back and forth with several different departments, signing number of contracts with distributor and the city, I could finally schedule the relocation job. The existing gas pipe needed to get revealed so the gas contractor can get to it and run the new pipe to my house. I started digging on May 10th, but I realized that the existing pipe's been protected by a huge block of concrete which needed to get removed. So I borrowed a big jackhammer from my neighbor and carefully broke it apart without damaging the pipe. I certainly didn't want my house to blow up now. And then on May 14th, they finally came over and laid the freaking gas line down. After a whole year of waiting and just 1 hour of actual labor, it was suddenly all over. The new gas line was in, boxes been installed, all the styrofoam been repaired and straightened up. It's finally time to find another contractor to apply the finish coat of synthetic stucco. After several phone calls, I found this guy who gave me a reasonable estimate and scheduled the job having done by the end of June. He said he wanted to have it out of the way before he leaves for vacation to Croatia. And again, I thought to myself, this was great. I will finally have the exterior of the house done as well as the interior of the first condo, and I could finally put it on market for sale with just several months of delay. I also needed to wrap up the subsidy application for thermal insulation. However, I needed to make some changes to it. But the specialist guy decided it was too much work for him, and without a warning, he terminated the contract with me. He literally told me he has too many applications to handle and have no time for reworking mine. What a jerk. So not only I just went through the facade nightmare, but the subsidy for insulation application became nightmare of its own. I've been really counting on this money. I could finish lots of jobs with it. I thought I was gonna spend it on finishing the parking lot and terraces. So I started making phone calls but couldn't find anyone who'd be willing to redo it for me. This is not going great. At least the good news was that the real estate values went up by at least 30 or 40% since the COVID pandemic started. Okay, so while I was waiting for the stucco contractor to finish my facade, I spent some of the remaining money on ordering the butcher block slab for staircase treads and on some more wood trim for stairs. Then on May 24th, I connected the main power lines to the fuse boxes, and on May 26th, I finally started working on dressing up the stairs. I had the slab delivered Albert and my good neighbor Peter helped me to carry the heavy pieces inside. Then I cut all them threads and all the trim pieces and dry fitted it all together. Then I took it apart again, sanded it, routed the edges, stained it, polished it, glued it, and screwed it all back together properly to make sure the stairs will never squeak in the future. On June 1st, I had it all done. After finishing the stairs, I started taking it easier on myself because I've been really feeling the fatigue and wear on my body for a while, and I thought this would be a good time to start regenerating a bit. I started going out for walks and jogging along the river. I also started stretching and working out at the street workout gym. In the meantime, I finished patching all the staircase trim screw holes, resanded it and repainted it again with last coat of white latex paint. I also finished installing all the trim around door surrounds, sanded it and painted it as well. By this time, I've been desperately calling the stucco contractor again, asking him when are they going to start already. The end of June was approaching and I had no word from him on when they actually gonna do the job. He said they'll be here next week. I was like, okay, and I kept monitoring the weather. While waiting, I've done some more work inside condo number 2 with taping the vapor barrier, and on May 25th I had the gas heater installed by the contractor in condo number 1. Alright, so the end of June was here and I had no stucco. This guy's been driving me nuts. He left for that freaking vacation to Croatia for 2 weeks and just kept me waiting. They were supposed to apply the second base coat and the finished stucco coat to my house by now, but he won't be back home till mid-July. Fucking hell. Okay, I'm properly pissed, but I had no other choice than to wait. I still trusted the guy. They're still gonna do it after he comes back. I understand the difficulties a contractor might be going through with people during this COVID pandemic, the weather, delays at other jobs, etc. I understand that the vacation been booked and he needed to go. It's all understandable. So I kept working on little things here and there. Can't do much because I have no money to spend on supplies. I can't purchase any more material to work with. So I'm just using whatever leftovers I have for finishing some framing around skylights, etc. I'm just trying to rest more and get back in shape by working out a little bit. After 2 weeks of waiting, the guy came back from vacation but have not called me. I'm getting all angry and I keep calling him instead. But all I hear back again is next week. Then finally on July 6th, he sent me here one guy who starts applying the second base coat on the south side and done some work around doors as well. I thought to myself, okay, this looks good. He's taking care of things finally, and soon the whole crew is gonna come and finish the entire house. Except they didn't. The following day, I finally had a chimney for the gas heater in condo number 1 installed by the roofer, which didn't go too well either. I had to redo it myself anyway because it wasn't plumbed properly. Then again, I continued working on little things here and there just to kill some time while still waiting for the stucco people. For instance, I installed ducts for kitchen extractor hoods in remaining 2 condos. I needed to cut some rectangle holes through the framing for that, and I finished framing the structure around all the skylights and below the skylights. To be able to finish the skylights in the high ceiling entrance foyers, I also built scaffoldings out of some timber leftovers. I also finished framing the upstairs ceiling joists, by which I basically finalized all the framing. So all the framing is finally done. Then I removed protective tapes from all the door frames. It didn't go easy because the tape been left on them doors for too long and been exposed to UV rays. This should have been done long time ago. Now I had to use combination of gasoline and some scrapers to get all of the brittle tape and glue residue off of it. After all the frames been cleaned up, I covered all the doors with plastic again to protect the shades I installed earlier from dust and fly shit. So I'm calling this stucco guy on a weekly basis, but he still has no concrete answer for me on when they're actually gonna start the job. He keeps making excuses such he doesn't have enough people, etc. On July 19th, I'm going ahead and started working on some plumbing. I'm installing the remaining 2 built-in toilet flush tanks and wastewater pipes during following week. July 26, I primed the south side facade wall to speed up the process for the stucco crew. The guy called me one day and brought over 10 buckets of finished stucco compound, mentioning they're going to do it soon. Finally, something's happening. I've got no more money for working on the house, so I'm just screwing around trying to figure out my next steps. Where I'm gonna get money for food from? My YouTube channel is not making anything. Throughout time, I made acquaintance with my neighbor across the street and we talked often. He runs a gravestone shop. He cuts slabs of granite and makes gravestones out of it. One day he complained he's backed up with orders thanks to the COVID pandemic, so I figured I offered him a help. I told him I could help him out till my facade is done and I receive the money from the subsidy or till my condo sells. And to my surprise, he agreed. I thought to myself, okay, this is great. I have this temporary job now, so I won't die of starvation. This was my safety net now. I couldn't keep spending any more cash from the money I've been saving for the stucco crew. So through the rest of the summer, from the end of July and through August, I worked with them stonemasons getting paid under the table. I worked in the shop cutting the granite slabs on a big diamond blade saw into smaller pieces that needed then to get polished on another machine and glued together to form a gravestone. Then we transported the finished pieces to a graveyard and installed it for the customer. This job helped me to overcome a difficult time, not only money-wise but also mental-wise, cause of daily socializing. And then finally on August 11th, the stucco crew showed up and applied finish coat only to the south side wall where I had the scaffolding standing. They were done in just a couple of hours and we arranged for finishing the rest of the house after I moved the scaffolding to the opposite side of the house. While I kept waiting for him, I continued working with the gravestones. The job wasn't physically too demanding, so in the afternoons I maintained my calisthenics routine doing handstand push-ups and muscle-ups. But the stucco guy still kept postponing the job, so one day on August 18th I decided to finish applying the white stucco finish coat to 4 arches myself so I can move the goddamn scaffolding over to the other side already. I also installed the first exterior light fixture at the top and installed finish trim onto the rake frame, which I also patched the holes at, sanded it, caulked it and painted it 3 coats. By the end of August I started running out of patience with this guy. Summer is over and cold weather is coming soon, and I'm not going through another winter without the stucco. I was going mental. I wanted to save some time for the stucco crew, so I made an arrangement with my neighbor that I'll work with them only for 3 days a week. On the remaining 3 days, I would start applying the second base stucco coat to the rest of the house myself. I needed to flatten the surface between the doors properly, and I didn't believe anymore that this crew would do quality job that I required anyway. So on August 29th, I went ahead and started mixing mud again. I challenged myself physically and mentally again, and after 3 months of waiting, I started applying the second base coat. I've done the west side first and then the east side. Then I moved the scaffolding and started flattening the north side too by using 8.5 foot long trowel blade. Then I applied one more coat to it. So I applied total of 3 base coats over the rest of the house to make the surface as flat as it should be. Then I applied primer and eventually I found a new crew to apply the finish coat. So I spent September partially working with gravestone and partially preparing the facade for the finish coat. Week by week, 4 months of waiting passed and I needed new stucco crew. The way I found this 4th and last facade contractor was just a matter of coincidence. You see, because I needed to find a new specialist for preparing the subsidy application, I've been making tons of phone calls till I found this guy who was willing to help me out with it. So he came over together with his wife to view my house one day to see what can be done about the application. This guy seemed shady as hell and I've been afraid of getting scammed. At that point, I pretty much gave up on the subsidy funds reimbursement altogether again. While I talked to them during the visit, I mentioned the facade nightmare I've been going through and that I'm currently searching for a stucco crew. So that's how I finally got my stucco done. After 1 year of facade clusterfuck when I hired 3 different contractors and none of them finished the job, forcing me to learn everything on the go and repair all their mess, and finishing all the prep work all by myself. All the hurdles been overcome and it's now finally all over. I now had a crew who will finally apply the finish coat for me. On September 23rd, the 4th and final crew arrived and applied the white finish coat on all the arches, and then 2 days later they applied the stucco to the rest of the house. The facade is now finally done. I could finally move on and finish jobs I had to wait with for the facade to get finished first, like the gutter downspouts, trim underneath the overhangs, or lightning rods. Alright, the facade is finally behind me, but now another issue came up. After removing the protective plastic from all the doors, I noticed the gray plastic pieces at the bottom of the door frames where the door frame meets the threshold started breaking apart on their own, and I was forced to start another warranty claim. And again, they tried to blame me that I broke it by improperly using the doors or that I tampered with their installation. What's the logic on this accusation? So we've been emailing and calling back and forth, and I became really angry that they've been reluctant to find a solution for this issue. Apparently, those plastic pieces were bad quality from the manufacturer. And because they couldn't get just pulled out and replaced, basically the only correct solution would be to replace all the door frames. But that's not doable either at this point. It would mean lots of additional work. Cutting out the styrofoam insulation, ripping them frames out, and fucking up all the new facade that's been just finished. And I'm definitely not taking that route. So I started giving them ideas how to just cover them goddamn cracked plastics somehow with additional metal flashing. And after numerous emails and phone calls, that's what they eventually did. An older technician guy came over one day and had some aluminum flashing prepared with him and just glued it on top of the broken plastic pieces to cover it up. Problem solved. Also, now that the stucco was done, I could finally finish installing the trim over the north side rake and then the east side and west side soffit and fascia too. I used plywood for the soffit and regular timber boards for fascia. I painted everything white, patched the screw holes, sanded it, caulked it, and painted it again. Had it all done by October 10th. Then I sold the scaffolding because I no longer needed it. I even made little profit on it, and from that money I also finally installed the downspouts, and on October 12th I had the mandatory lightning rod system installed by a contractor as well. Okay, so the first condo is now ready, but I needed to move out of it so it's all cleared out for showings. But in order to be able to move over to the condo number 3, I needed to make some preparations. But I also needed money for those preparations. I needed to purchase some supplies. So because I was broke, I got back to working in my neighbor's attic to continue building that bathroom. He even paid me some money up front so I could get them supplies I needed for finishing one of the rooms upstairs in condo number 3 sooner. In this video from October 20th, I'm showing all these intriguing framing details I put together in Peter's attic. October 25th and 26th, I put up an insulation and vapor barrier under the roof, and I also installed steel subframe for drywall in my new room. I also pulled through electrical wires for outlets and lights. On October 28th, I had the sheetrock hanged and the room was ready for moving in. Next, I needed to build a temporary shower and install a toilet. I connected all the plumbing, including the little water heater. I even bought a used washer so I don't need to go to the laundromat anymore. Then I moved all my belongings from condo number 1 to condo number 3, and by the end of October I was all set. By this time everything is pretty much ready for having the condo number 1 listed for sale in the shell stage. There is no fixtures, no appliances, no kitchen, nor bathrooms. On the outside, in place of the parking lot, there is still this pile of concrete debris that I need to get rid of. The terraces are not done yet either, but my funds been depleted and I have no other option than to start selling the place as it is right now. I also spent some money on snow guards that needed to get installed on the bottom of the roof so the snow and ice don't keep sliding down when melting. This might either cause damage to the gutters or it could injure someone, plus it makes really terrible earthquake-like noises when the ice slides down. The whole house shakes. The progress on my project has completely stalled by now. At this point, it's been about 6 months I haven't done much work at the house. Just small jobs here and there. I've mostly worked at graveyards and now I keep working at Peter's house. But that job is just temporary. Soon I'll be done working up there and then what? Where do I get money for my daily expenses? I'm still gonna need another income because I have no idea how long it's gonna take to sell the first condo. On November 4th, I managed to get the pile of concrete debris finally removed after a whole year just sitting there. It's finally gone and the yard immediately looks more appealing. The next day, I pre-wired all the remaining skylights and I installed the 2 remaining servos inside the foyer skylights. I also made some repairs in the fuse box in condo number 1. And I installed an outlet in the media box so I could plug in the power supply for the remotely controlled foyer skylight and make it operational for the buyers. By November 13th, I finished the metal framing, insulation, and vapor barrier around all remaining skylights. By November 18th, I finally finished installing the second layer of roof insulation, which I bought from the money I made at Peter's. In the meantime, I also spent 11 hours of labor in the basement repairing all the peeling mortar again to make the walls look cleaner for the home inspection. Despite the delays with legal procedures regarding dividing the building into 3 condos, the condo number 1 been finally listed for sale on November 22nd, 2021 for $5,175,000 Czech crowns, which was about $235,000 at that time. After 2 years of work, the redemption process has started. Obstacles been conquered. It's time to get paid for my efforts. I had no idea what to expect. I needed a serious miracle right now. For listing my condo, I chose an agent working with the Remax franchise. This nice lady seemed like she was gonna take a good care of everything. The pictures, virtual tour with staging, open house, etc. While waiting for more showings, I continued working in Peter's attic. On November 22nd, I started covering the walls with sheetrock till I got it done by the end of the month. Then back at my house, I also installed vapor barrier over my roof insulation, taped over the seams and installed some of the plumbing using the leftover PEX pipes. After I finished the work at Peter's house, I entered the gray zone. There was nothing else left for me to do at my house either because I had no money for supplies and I was just waiting and waiting for phone calls from my agent with showing requests. I needed to sell this freaking condo. I had no idea how long this is going to take considering it's being sold just half finished. I'm broke, eating cheap, I'm doing nothing. I'm taking advantage of all this free time and I'm starting going out for runs along the river even though it's freezing cold outside. I have no energy. I'm getting frustrated by having no money and no offers on the house are coming in either. So I've gotta figure something out. I'm searching for a temporary job online, trying to see what kind of job could work out for me getting paid under the table. On December 13th, I emailed local construction company I discovered, which builds houses out of LGS, light gauge steel framing. I've been always interested in this technology, so I figured I got nothing to lose here and I just shot blind cause they didn't have any job listings. I wasn't expecting much, but to my surprise, the owner of the company texted me back 2 days later at 10 p.m. On December 20th, I got up at 5 a.m. and in the darkness of the freezing morning, I got in my car and went to work. I got trained and assembled my first wall sections that day, thinking, for how long am I actually gonna need to keep working in this warehouse before my first condo sells? I've learned the work very quickly and I got a deal with the boss that I'll get paid by the assembled weight, which motivated me to make some more money and I actually started liking it in there. So I started hauling ass and I done twice, thrice, 4 times more work than the existing employees. And of course, they didn't like me for that, but I didn't care. This agreement allowed me to work usually only till lunchtime or 1 p.m., so I didn't get too tired, and then I still had plenty of time left to keep up with my workouts and runs while making about $500 a week. And here we are. It's 2022 and we're still in COVID. I worked and learned more and more about this construction system. That's why I wanted to actually work in there in the first place. I wanted to experience it firsthand because after I cash out my project, I'm planning on building my future houses out of the LGS. While I'm working at the warehouse, I'm also selling my house. There has been a showing from time to time, but no offer yet. So on January 22nd, we've scheduled for an open house. But just some locals showed up and only a couple of people came from the actual listing. I've been getting really frustrated because it felt like I was never gonna sell this first condo, but I kept hoping. I've also been dealing with lots of moisture condensation accumulating, which then turned into ice on my skylight windows during the freezing days. I needed to keep up with it by using some rugs and paper towels so the water from the melting ice is not dripping down onto the floors and running down the walls. I had to make sure there is no water present before each and every showing so the buyers don't have any suspicions or don't make any conclusions. I needed to sell this freaking place. I contracted the COVID for the first time sometimes during the third week of January, even though I've been vaccinated. But I didn't get tested till following Monday when we actually received those mandatory COVID tests. It came back positive, so I was forced to spend that week in quarantine. Part of the reason that I didn't have money for finishing my project and taking this temporary job instead was that I couldn't find another specialist for finishing and filing my subsidy for insulation application. But coincidentally enough, one day I realized that my current boss is actually also a certified subsidy specialist, and I asked him if this would be something he could help me with. And he said that indeed he can and asked me to email him what I got. So at last it looks like the subsidy application might not be doomed just yet. There's still a little chance that I might be able to cash out the $20,000. Once he saw my paperwork, he said he's gonna have it ready for me by the end of February. He was gonna fabricate some missing invoices for all the roof, facade and flooring insulation and other things, so we get it to the required spending limit and cover areas, thus won't need to make any additional changes to the application. I needed to get the subsidy funds reimbursed before the first condo changes owners. Another thing I was able to accomplish while working in there was the LGS frames for my terraces. I figured why not give it a shot. Instead of building it out of wood, I'll try this galvanized light gauge steel frame. So sometimes in January I took advantage of the circumstances and I turned my drawings in the office. They took a while to actually take a look at it and have it rolled out for me, but I kept pushing on them and I even had to go in the office and sit down with the engineer by the computer to work on some details. By February 11th I had a first batch of profiles rolled out and ready. Then I borrowed a very long trailer and had it delivered to my house. Even though I had to fight for work with the other guys because there were too many of us at times and too little to do, I was able to make about $2,000 a month, and I used most of that money to pay off those terraces. And then the war on Ukraine started. On Thursday, February 24th, 2022, Putin's Russian army invaded Ukraine. Bombs are falling as far as Kyiv and further towards the border with Poland. Suddenly, there was this chaos. Nobody knows what's going on and everyone's scared. How far can the bombs actually reach? Can they reach my house in Czechia too? My stress level is through the roof. What's this war going to mean for the real estate market now? For the whole economy? For the mortgage rates? For currency? We entered uncertain and unpredictable times. Western Europe is getting flooded with millions of Ukrainian refugees, yellow with blue flags displayed everywhere for support. Putin's totally ruining my plans right now. Government doesn't know if we will have enough natural gas for heating, and I just had a gas line brought to the house and gas heater installed. Energy prices shooting up. Nobody's gonna buy my condos now. I'm freaking out. I'm nervously observing the war's development development and updates. Hopefully, this war will be over soon. Ukrainians are going to fight back and beat Putin. At that time, no one would predict that the war will still be active 2 years later in 2024. Anyway, it's the end of February and I don't have the subsidy application ready. I'm calling the boss, where's my application at? But it's impossible to reach him for a couple of weeks. Once I finally reach him, he asks for a couple of weeks more. It's fine with me as long as it gets filed. I don't want to be too pushy. I understand he's a busy man. Alright, during March I kept working in the warehouse and waiting and waiting. I'm waiting for my boss with the subsidy application to get filed, and I'm waiting for an interested buyer. After the war started, the showings slowed down noticeably and I had to drop the price down to revive the interest. There's been a couple of showings but nothing promising till the end of the month. There was this young couple that seemed interested. Then they came back again for second showing and voila! On May 3rd I had the first contract signed at 5 million Czech crowns or $225,000 respectively. You can imagine my relief. My real estate agent Veronica achieved an impossible thing. She sold the first condo. She sold it with unfinished terraces and parking lot and other things. Unbelievable. It's a miracle. All I needed to do now was to just keep working at the warehouse and wait for the closing. In the meantime, I needed to get that subsidy done before the ownership of the condo changes. So I really started pressuring the boss to have it finally done because time is running out. In the meantime, the city's been working on installing that sewer pipeline underneath the road at front of my house. Road's been destroyed and holes been dug out, but at least my house will finally get connected to the public sewer system. March turned to April. Time just keeps dragging. This job at the warehouse, riveting wall sections together, is wearing me out. My carpals are killing me and my aging body is all achy. The only thing that keeps me going is that signed reservation contract of the first condo. I just need to hang in there till it sells. So I'm taking advantage of large and heavy trusses being rolled out to assemble as much weight as I can to pay off my terraces. Okay, so now that I have buyers for the first condo, I really needed to finalize that subsidy application so I get the funds reimbursed before the purchase goes through. But I'm having trouble getting in touch with my boss. This uncertainty is driving me nuts because I don't really know if he's gonna make it on time or not, but I'm trying to not get angry at him. It took nearly an entire month of grinding and pushing before he finally called me up to his office to put it together. I signed everything and placed that pile of papers in large envelope and mailed it to the Ministry of Environment. So after over 2 years of this subsidy application nightmare, when I've been turned down by the first specialist, then tried to get overcharged by another, then unable to find anyone else to fix it and file it for me, then this new guy made me wait for another 3 months, I finally had it completed and submitted for reimbursement. And now I just need to wait for the funds. Only after then I can transfer my condo to the new owners. Time is of the essence. Alright, I needed to get back to work, so the very next day on April 26th, I had a second and final batch of profiles rolled out for the terrace's support trusses and I hauled them in my minivan to my house. The spring is finally here. Time to start digging holes for the terrace's footing. So while I'm building all them terraces and working in the warehouse, I'm waiting for a phone call or an email from the Ministry of Environment with the status of my subsidy application. Then on May 5th, I'm finally signing the first condo purchase contract with closing date on July 31st. We gave it 3 months because the buyers needed to take care of some collaterals and I needed them subsidy funds reimbursement to make it within that date too. Alright, so now the subsidy is in the main focus. I'm nervously anticipating some news from the Ministry of Environment any day now, but still nothing. I'm having a bad feeling about this. But when I spoke to the lady that's been approving my application, she got all desperate on the phone, complaining that she can't make any sense out of all these invoices that I turned in. She said it's a total mess and that she needed me to redo the whole thing. My nerves been on the move because I thought when I hired a specialist and paid him a fee for the work, it should have been prepared correctly and I wouldn't have the need to worry about a thing. Turns out that the pile of papers my boss handed me to mail in was just a completely unorganized mess. Plus he made a number of mistakes in the application itself and the few codes and numbers been been missing. What the freaking hell? So in the end, after all this time and 3 different specialists, I still needed to redo it myself anyway. What followed was very enriching because I was forced to learn everything about this freaking subsidy rules. I learned all the different codes and conditions. And I then corrected a bunch of stuff in the application. I also organized and paired all the invoices with payments and bank statements, which I thought my boss has done, but he hasn't. I had all those invoices and everything in my computer, so it wasn't like I was going through a pile of papers. Thanks to having all those papers in PDF files on my computer, I had it all done in just one day when I worked on it till late night. The fact that I had to correct all his mistakes and redo the whole thing myself been really pissing me off because I couldn't afford another delay. The time been ticking, the closing date been approaching, and I needed to have it reimbursed like right now. So I took all the corrected papers back to my boss and had the application stamped and signed again. Then I mailed it to the Ministry of Environment and had my fingers crossed that everything's gonna be fine this time. Alright, so for the next 3 months, not much been happening. Terraces subframe been ready, purchase contract been signed, and subsidy application been filed. So I just continued working at the warehouse, assembling LGS frames and enjoying the warmer weather. I've been going out for bicycle rides and keeping up with my calisthenics routine at the nearby workout place by the river. That lady from Ministry of Environment eventually confirmed that all the subsidy application paperwork is now correctly filed and I just needed to wait for the money to be wired to my bank account. So I waited and waited and waited. It's been always very frustrating that my life depends on other people's actions. Everyone's taking forever, and I feel helpless when trying to speed up the process. So I called the lady a couple times to just remind her that I have the closing on that condo coming up on July 31st, and I needed them funds to get wired by then. So I keep nervously waiting, not knowing if it's really gonna work out or not. I don't want to end up postponing the closing date. On July 23rd, I allowed the buyers to move their furniture and stuff in before the closing. Shortly after that, they notified me that an electrician they hired realized the breaker box is not wired correctly. Turns out it needed major repairs, or should I say upgrades, because the electrician I hired before didn't use GFCI breakers and they needed to be added now so the breaker box meets the code. And then on July 25th, a fucking bird carved a hole in my brand new facade. At first, I couldn't figure out how the hole I just discovered came about. What caused it? Mysterious hole just appeared at the top of one of the arches. What the hell's going on? The initial theory was that a mice climbed up there somehow and carved in a nest, and then I thought, or maybe a bird done it. So I googled it out and found out that a woodpecker might done it. Then one day I caught that little fucker. It was indeed a woodpecker. So now I somehow needed to protect the facade from further damage. I bought this dummy crow and a ultrasound bird defender, but it was effective only partially. That little fucker was not scared of the big bird and even jumped on its head. The hole kept getting deeper and deeper anyway. So what to do now? I decided to stuck the scarecrow straight inside the hole so the woodpecker couldn't get in. It seemed impossible to repel the bird. It kept returning, trying desperately to get back inside the hole over the dummy crow, causing additional damage, but eventually, after a few months, the woodpecker gave up and probably moved onto someone else's house facade. The end of July is here and I have no subsidy funds. I was forced to have the purchase contract extended anyway, with closing date postponed to August 31st. How much longer do I need to wait for the freaking money? It's been over 3 months at this point since I originally submitted the subsidy application. Is this freaking nightmare ever gonna end? August 16th was my life-changing day. I got up at 5 a.m. and went to work as usual. I struggled that day riveting some steel profiles together. The rivet holes didn't line up and I had to make some alterations to it. I was getting all pissed and shit and I cursed a lot. After fighting this piece of some metal, pounding it with hammer. I finally pushed the rivet through the hole and pressed it. I was so happy that I yelled loudly, "I'm a victor! I'm a victor!" At the same moment I was yelling, I received a notification on my phone. I picked it up from the workbench and I see a notification from my bank. I asked myself, what could it be? I haven't made any transactions or anything. Maybe low balance notification? Then I tapped the banner and I couldn't believe what I'm seeing. The message said that I just received the 575,000 Czech crowns. Holy guacamole! Oh my fucking god! I'm a victor! I'm a fucking victor! I won! I yelled again. I beat the fucking system. I just received the subsidy money. Free money. 20,000 fucking dollars. After years of struggling with it, when the first specialist gave up on it, another one seemed shady, and the last one made me wait 3 months only to fuck it up that I needed to actually correct it and file it myself, and then wait another 3 months to get it processed. I can't believe that I finally have that money. So I dropped the tools, grabbed my stuff, and I quit the job instantly. After 7.5 months working in that warehouse, I could finally quit. I'm out of here. And after 14 months in total, I could finally restart working full-time on my own house renovation project. It is time to get back to work and put in some serious hours to finish the goddamn thing. I am now officially entering the final stage. So I immediately went on online shopping spree the very same day for some new tools. I bought a battery-powered lawnmower so I don't need to drag the extension cord anymore, and I cut the yard faster. I also bought a brand new Festool saw for cutting the mineral acoustic insulation so I could start filling the cavities quickly and efficiently. It was also time to finally replace my women's bike, so I bought men's gravel bike instead. So now that I got paid for the subsidy, we could go ahead and change the ownership of the first condo. The transfer been submitted to Register of Deeds, and I just needed to wait for roughly a month for the Register of Deeds to process it and to get finally paid for the condo too. The next day, on August 17th, I had the acoustic insulation delivered. I hired a helper, a guy named Jacob, I met while working at the warehouse. We started filling in the walls cavities between the 3 condos to acoustically separate them. Finally, some progress being made after all this time. It feels good. This was the first thing that needed to get done because the new owners are gonna be moving in soon. At least that's what I thought at that time. There was a lot more work that needed to get done in their place too, so they actually moved in a lot later. By August 28th, the wall separating the first 2 condos been filled up, sealed with vapor barrier, acoustic tapes applied to the studs, and covered up with OSB boards. Progress have not been exceptionally fast because Jacob's been actually slowing me down instead of doing things faster. I've done some electrical work too, pulled some wires inside the wall separating condo number 2 and 3 so they can also get filled with insulation. Breaker box in condo number 1 been reworked again, and multimedia box is ready too with a doorbell, data router, and a skylight power supply. I had to fire Jacob because he's been slowing me down a lot. By the time he cut something, I'd have it done twice. Slow learner, too many ruined pieces of OSB boards, too much arguing and talking back. He cost me too much money for slower progress, so he had to go. After that, I decided I'm not gonna be hiring any helper anymore, and I'll finish the interior all by myself. I'll do it faster, better, cheaper, stronger. On September 2nd, the parking lot job started. I rented a mini excavator with an operator from my boss for a site prep. It didn't go smooth, but eventually he got it done to a certain level of satisfaction. This operator guy also recommended me some paving crew who would lay the paver prefabricates down for me for a reasonable price. Then I had the aggregates delivered for the underlayment and had it spread over the area. I also borrowed a heavy ride-on drum roller compactor and compacted the base properly. From the beginning, building the parking lot's been pretty challenging process since none of the people I hired had enough experience. The excavator operator has not done a thorough job with evenly spreading the base layer, which then needed to get reduced in height. I tried to assist him as much as I could, but still the result was no good. And then neither of the paving crews been able to work without supervision. I haven't been planning on on working on the parking lot myself. I thought when I hired all these people I could just focus on working inside. But I was wrong again. I needed to be there with them every day to babysit them and also work with them, otherwise they'll still be working on it right now. Pavers been delivered on September 7th and the recommended crew started setting down the curbstones in a bed of concrete. Shortly after they started, I got into an argument with them over some sloping issues. Especially one of them gypsies been really dumb, arrogant and rude, complaining about everything. He's been complaining about the paver pallets being stacked too high and the pavers being too heavy to bring him down, and everything's been too much work for him. So I told him, hey, there's a bus stop. If you don't like the job, you can leave right now. He got triggered. We nearly got in fight. This guy wanted to punch me. I was more than ready to punch him back, but I didn't want any further problems with them gypsies, so I held back. I had to fire this whole crew because the tension been too high. I told their boss to get their shit and get the hell out, cause I don't have time for this bullshit. Luckily, the driver who delivered the aggregates had a number for another crew, so I called them and coincidentally they were available to take over the job. So they picked up where the previous crew left off the very next day. But this new crew been also sloppy and slow, so I decided to supervise them and to work with them to speed up the process and to get it done correctly. I worked there with them every day, hauling ass, breaking back, so they don't keep taking smoke breaks every 10 minutes and talk about some really important stuff. They always had something more important than this job to talk about. Mid-September and the parking lot is nearly finished. At one point I asked my other neighbor to come over with his little excavator to help with removing some of the already compacted base layer of rocks because the previous guy I mentioned earlier didn't spread it right. At another point, a different neighbor across the street called the city cops on me because I had a pile of aggregates, rocks and gravel temporarily sitting on the road. He's been all upset that I've been blocking the road and it's been difficult for him to get in and out his gate, which was of course a lie. This grumpy old communist been getting on my nerves for quite some time. He's been jealous of my house and how much money I'm making out of it ever since I started working on it. He's been spitting fire, causing hell all the time. So I told the cops that those piles gonna be removed soon. They understood the process and listened to the crazy guy for a minute verbally assaulting me, and then they smiled and left. Even though I worked with the gypsy crew every day, they managed to fuck up the sloping anyway. There was this one particular spot where sloping been changing direction. I measured out and marked everything with the masonry string for him, but the guy didn't pay attention to it and removed few inches of the fine gravel base I prepared prior. At that point, I've already been so tired of these guys, so I told them to finish it as it was, finish cutting all the edges, etc., and I was gonna correct the sloping on my own. It's been too complicated for them to figure the whole thing out. At the same time I've been working on the parking lot, the city's been working on installing the sewer line at the front of my house. On September 20th, they finally connected my house to it. Big hole been dug out on my front yard and new access shaft been installed as well. And again, for like a fifth time, I redid the breaker box in condo number 1 because it still wasn't right. On September 21st, the endless wait for the proceeds from the sale of the first condo is over. I finally got paid. Minus the 5% real estate agent commission, I collected roughly 4.7 million Czech crowns, which was about $213,000 at that time. Let's take a moment here and talk about the money. When I came back to Czechia, I only had left about $200,000 after all that traveling and other spendings. When I started the search for a flip property, I wasn't quite sure if I can actually make it with these limited funds. So I've been searching for a cheap old house till I found this one. I paid about $52,000 for it and spent the rest of the money on converting it to a triplex. That remaining $150,000 I spent on it also included my daily expenses, rent, food, car, gas, alimony, insurance, utilities, all the tools, materials, and laborers. Eventually, I realized that the money is not gonna be enough to finish the whole project and I needed to strategize. I ran out of cash, sold my car, and took a part-time job. By selling this first condo, I got all my money back and I still have 2 condos to finish and sell. I can probably sell them for a little more than the first one, so I'm probably looking at another about $500,000 minus the 5% commission. And I still needed to invest about $50K more in this project. So the total sale price would be around $730K, and after deducting all the expenses of about $250K, I'm looking at a clean profit from this triplex conversion at around $480,000, which is the most money I would have ever made on a single project. But this project is not finished yet at this point, and I'm still looking at another 12 months of labor. The time I spent working on it would be somewhere around 2.5+ years after deducting the year and a half I couldn't work on it. The total time is about 4 years. It is a long time of overcoming all sorts of hurdles, that's for sure. 4 years of my life invested in here. Okay, back to the story. The first thing I had to do was I went to the BMW dealership and I bought a slightly used BMW 420d. I just had to do it because I needed some sort of satisfaction for all those years of hardship. I needed to feel like I've achieved something and all that hard times been worth it. All those times struggling at temporary jobs in different countries and being homeless at times. And now I got finally paid and I can drive my ass in a leather seat behind a steering wheel with a BMW logo on it. Suddenly the world looks a lot better from back here. So this is it. This is the moment I can finally start finishing the rest of the project. I'm gonna finish the remaining 2 condos, the terraces, the front steps, etc. For following 12 months, I focused strictly on that. And of course, I wanted and I needed to continue document everything so I could one day put together this full story video. So for that purpose, I bought a couple of new GoPro 11 cameras, a couple of new Insta360 cameras, and I also bought the new iPhone 14 Plus S Max Plus Maximum Top Spec that just came out, and the new Ultra watch. And I paid off some debts for some jobs I wasn't able to pay for before because I was broke. I paid off my accumulated alimony debt too. I just started burning through my new cash like crazy. Alright, so I knew there's a lot of work in front of me, but on top of finishing the remaining 2 condos, I also had unexpectedly some additional work to do back in condo number 1 again. The buyers of the first condo requested to have a ventilation with heat recuperation system additionally installed. I immediately knew how much extra work it's gonna be with tearing sections of drywall down and drilling holes and stuff, but I still decided I'd rather do all the work myself than to have a contractor do it. They would most likely mess it up because they wouldn't know where to pull the ducting through the walls and ceilings. So I had to figure everything out regarding this process because I had no experience with this system. Consequently, I decided I'm gonna install the recuperation units in remaining 2 condos as well. This solution will help with energy bills and also with air quality and humidity control, thus reducing the condensation on them skylight windows too. So I conducted vast research online and eventually I found everything I needed to know. I needed a unit that will fit through the attic opening and also will be accessible for filters replacing. I've been wondering if I'll ever find such unit, but after a long search I found one manufacturer that met the criteria. I also needed a total of 6 vent chimneys that will go on top of the roof, 2 for each condo. After a long research, I finally placed the orders for all the parts. It was an infinite ducting and other gazillion things to install. On September 28th, I drilled first holes for the ducts in the middle condo to test it, how it's all gonna fit first before I start destroying the drywall back in condo number 1. I needed to see how I'm gonna lift the unit up in the tight attic, where I'm gonna be pulling the ducts through, where I'm gonna cut out the openings for the vent chimneys, where I'm gonna place all the distribution boxes and silencers, where I'm gonna pull all the wiring for the sensors through, and so on. Everything looks good, so I did some planning and strategizing on how I'm actually gonna execute on this installation in condo number 1. Every morning upon waking up, I need to sit down for a moment to realize myself that I really did it. I really really sold the first condo and I really have the money and I can do all this stuff. I need to understand how blessed I am and that the work is not over yet. I need to keep working on my dreams and finish this thing. I must get up early every morning, get some coffee and haul ass to make my time worth on this planet. Alright, so I also needed to buy some more supplies like plumbing, electrical and such. And of course I needed many new battery powered tools. So for instance I ordered new Milwaukee PEX press tool for the plumbing. I also ordered the WPC wood plastic composition terrace planks. So as soon as they arrive I needed to finish installing those too. Okay then, let's get some work done. I installed all the exterior lights first so the house looks more finished on the outside. During this activity I tried recording the time-lapse video on the Insta360 camera and learned editing the video for the first time. On October 4th I went ahead and started cutting out sections of drywall in condo number 1 for the ventilation installation. Following days I continued with installation of the vent chimneys. It's been a little challenging process. For one of the vents, I was gonna use a hole after one of the existing smaller vents I had installed before. That one was no longer needed because the bathrooms and kitchen extractor hood are gonna be connected to the new system. I just needed to enlarge the hole to fit the new bigger vent. For the other vent, I cut out a new hole. One of them vents is an intake and the other one is an exhaust. I also needed to extend the connecting ducts and add an elbow to it so I can pull it through the thick roof insulation to the attic space. Over the 3 days I repeated this process in all 3 condos, 2 chimneys per day, cutting, screwing, caulking, sealing, taping. On October 10th all the ducting been pulled through in the downstairs and I started covering back some of the holes. Had the distribution boxes ready to hook up in the attic too. Now I needed to pull the rest of the ducts from downstairs upwards and hook it up. I pulled through all the wiring too for all the humidity, CO2 and motion sensors and also for the touchpad. The air intake and exhaust ducts to the vent chimneys been also connected. And as a last step, I lifted the unit itself up inside the tight attic space. It involved some logistics, but I got it in. It finally started looking good. It all fits and the filters are accessible for replacing. My first experience with forced ventilation / recuperation system. Next I continued connecting everything. All the remaining ducts and wires up in the tight attic. Then I turned the power on and I got it running. It works. I feel satisfied with this additional installation. I was actually able to do it and I even got paid for it. I tied up the ducts inside the wall cavities so they stay in place and don't rattle, and I covered the walls back with drywall. All that new drywall then needed to get mudded, taped, sanded and primed. On October 15th I also installed the pull down attic steps and I sealed the door. Now you can't even hear there's any ventilation unit running in the attic. It's completely silent. After some wait time, the WPC planks been delivered and on October 20th I started working on it. Because I used the LGS steel frame instead of wooden frame, I couldn't just screw them down. The thin metal wouldn't hold the screws in, so I needed to rivet it. For that purpose, I bought a cordless Milwaukee riveting tool. I wanted to have it done quickly to avoid cold weather, so I needed to work fast. I've added acoustic tape to the steel frame so the foot traffic doesn't resonate to it, and I kept drilling holes, cutting planks and riveting them down. I continued working tirelessly. After installing the planks one by one, I applied recommended oil to protect the decking against weathering, but frankly the oil sucks. It leaves uneven spots till this day. But luckily the decks are getting dirty from dust pollution, which is common here quickly, so the discoloration is not that obvious. By October 27th I had the rear tops done and I started covering the front tops right after. But before I could proceed, I needed to install these reinforcements for future optional railing. I used some treated timber for that. By October 31st, the front tops are covered as well, and the next day I moved back to the rear to work on the sides. But my attempt's been cut short. You see, I wanted to route the edges of the top side boards in 45-degree angle, but my cheap router broke down. So I had to order a new one from Amazon. And again, I ordered a Milwaukee cordless tool. In addition, I bought a new Milwaukee vacuum cleaner as well. My Milwaukee tool collection keeps growing, and by this point I already have 8 new tools from him. I've been getting very disappointed with my favorite beloved DeWalt tools because they keep breaking down, so I decided I'm gonna convert. Because I couldn't continue working on the terraces while waiting for my new router to arrive, I started working on something else outside. After the sewer connection been completed by November 3rd, I had to fix the front yard again. I added some new topsoil, spreaded it and raked it nice and flat, and seeded the grass again. It's been pretty late into the season for the seeding, but I did it anyway, hoping it will germinate before winter. I also leveled the ground around the parking lot, made it look all nice and finished, and seeded the grass around there too. During bad weather days, I'm also continuing working in condo number 1, plastering the drywall after covering the recuperation ducts. Also, the gas heater's been brought operational by a gas specialist, so I can now finally work in there nice and warm. I can't wait to start working on the inside of the remaining 2 condos already and install everything. Even though I'm stacked with boxes and boxes of supplies and new tools, it still needed to wait till I get to it after finishing as much work as possible outside before the winter hits. So I'm working hard every day, 7 days a week from dawn till dusk. On November 8th, the road at front of my house is getting repaved after the sewer installation. And I'm preparing the parking lot for getting the pavers filled with nice river gravel. I started vacuuming out the dirt that I spread over previously. I thought it'd be a good idea to have the grass growing on the parking lot, but then I changed my mind and wanted to get the dirt out and replace it with gravel, which been delivered on November 10th. But I couldn't finish vacuuming it out because it started freezing up on me. So I had to abandon this project for now and come back to it later in January when temperature permitted. Then I received a new router and started routing the edges again. In a few days I had the sides of the terraces finished and I could finally proceed to work on the inside. By the way, by this time I collected 11 pieces of cordless Milwaukee tools. And again, during bad weather days, I continued working inside condo number 1, this time sanding the drywall. November 18th was the day I finally started working inside the middle condo. The very first thing I've done, I've added additional layer of acoustic insulation between the condos because the noises still been penetrating through pretty noticeably. And I continued preparing the steel framing for drywall offset walls around the perimeter. This solution should also improve the acoustic comfort between the condos. November 21st, the new owners of condo number 1 started renovation of the already renovated interior. During following several weeks, they had the bathrooms finished. The master bathroom been completely redone, changing the whole layout, deleting the freestanding tub and having a new larger stand-up shower installed instead. The vanity been moved in place of the former shower and washer hookup been added. All the plumbing and some electrical associated with these changes needed to get relocated, while I continued with the metal framing on my end, anchoring and straightening the profiles, getting it ready for electrical and then drywall. I also finished connecting all the ductwork for the recuperation unit by November 24th in the middle condo. By the end of November, I had all the metal framing finished downstairs and upstairs too. I also installed the attic ceiling insulation and pulled through some electrical wires for lighting there too. Next, I completed all the electrical wiring in entire unit. I even installed the remaining 2 gas heater chimneys by myself because the first condo chimney installation done by the roofer contractor over a year ago didn't go too well. And cleared out all the debris to make room for a load of acoustic drywall, which has been delivered on December 5th. In the meantime, the foundation exterior perimeter walls been covered with a veneer stone I purchased earlier by the contractor who's been working on finishing the interior next door. Besides the electrical, all the plumbing and ventilation is finished in the middle condo as well now, and I also added some backing for bathroom cabinets. I can now finally start hanging the sheetrock. I keep working in fast pace 7 days a week. On December 10th, I started the drywall installation, while on the outside the winter's been at a full swing this year. There has been some serious snowstorms. It just kept snowing and snowing. We've had nearly 2 feet of snow at times, which was very unusual. Compared compared to the previous winters, this year was the worst. I needed to keep up with shoveling the snow from the parking lot often. While I've been working on drywall, the crew next door in condo number 1 pretty much finished their tile work in the bathrooms. I checked on their progress on December 14th. They've created a marble hell, the same marble tiles on all walls in the master bathroom. I feel dizzy. Now, regarding the acoustic separation between the units, I installed 2 layers of acoustic drywall between the unit 1 and 2 and been testing the noise permeability levels, but it still wasn't good enough. I keep hearing the crew next door, so I added 1 more layer on top of it over the entire wall downstairs and upstairs. But I didn't screw it, I just used adhesive foam to attach it to it, which should also improve the comfort even further. But still, it's not good enough. I can still hear voices and noises from next door, so the last resort to solve this will be to also add additional 2 layers of drywall in the condo unit number 1 that's already finished. This is so frustrating. I thought the acoustic insulation and 1 layer of drywall should be good enough, but now it turns out 3 layers are needed on each side, so 6 layers of acoustic drywall in total separating the units. Hopefully it'll be sufficient. So I'm gonna have to figure out how I'm actually gonna execute on that additional installation. I'm gonna need to build the scaffolding in the foyer again, tear down some trims around the stairs, and redo the electrical boxes. Okay, I'm gonna have to take care of that later on as the last thing. For now, I need to focus on finishing the other 2 condos. I worked through the Christmas holidays, and on December 29th, the drywall's been completed in the middle condo. I started searching for a drywall contractor to finish the taping and mudding for me because I wanted to speed up the process. It would take too long for me as before to be taping, mudding, and sanding the whole unit all by myself again. I figured that by the time they'd be done sanding and priming, I'd be done with metal framing, electrical, and plumbing, and perhaps halfway installing the drywall in the last condo. So shortly after they'd finished the middle unit, they could continue in there too. Theoretically, I could be done with everything by the end of March and put the units up for sale, which would be great. I managed to find a crew that could start working on it in mid-January. At first, their progress looked good. I was excited that I don't have to do it myself. It's being done on its own. Soon, this place is gonna be ready for paint. Taping the flat surface joints progressed well, but just few days later, I noticed some sloppy job on the corners. Things were not ideal. I started noticing things. And then it became clear that they don't have any experience with taping corners with the paper tape. So I started raising concerns, and they kept promising they'll fix all them issues. Because I've been getting nervous about the results, I started inspecting their work on daily basis, and I've been finding more and more bad spots. They didn't know how to apply the tape correctly. Uneven mud, lots of air bubbles, and I kept asking for having it repaired. I needed them to tear it down and redo it. I even gave them a little demonstration on how to apply the paper tape correctly and spreading the mud evenly with a corner trowel. But they kept refusing to use the corner trowel, claiming it was too difficult. Once I left them working on their own, they just masked all the air bubbles by adding a thick layer of finished mud over it. I got so pissed seeing all this shit that evening after they left. They've been ruining all my clean and straight corners by these bulging and uneven tapes full of air bubbles. It was horrible. I just couldn't believe this shit. I honestly wanted to cry because I instantly knew what's it gonna take to fix all this. How much more work and time it's gonna involve. More delays are coming my way. After 3 days of babysitting these guys and asking for corrections, I ran out of patience. If they want me to pay top dollar, I also expect a top quality job and not this shit being done by unexperienced crew who don't even bring their own sufficient lighting. If they've not been using my lights, they would have been basically working in darkness. I've had enough of this. I emailed their boss in the evening and asked for them to stop the works and leave, but the boss didn't read the email and the guys came to work as usual the next morning. So I asked them politely to leave, and of course they've been surprised and called their boss to sort it all out. The boss came over, we walked through, and I showed him all the shit. He kept repeating, they'll fix it, but I already made my mind and I wanted them to leave because I've heard that many times before. I didn't trust their word anymore because by fixing it, they actually meant just covering it with more mud instead of tearing the botched tapes off. So this arguing been going on back and forth for a while till I got really pissed and I started yelling at them to get the fuck out of my house, that I don't understand why they keep talking and making excuses. It's been rather embarrassing moment because I raised my voice quite a bit. It was 7 o'clock in the morning and all the neighbors must have heard me yelling. So the plaster crew been fired on January 27th, and now what? I've lost count how many contractors I've fired. It became a pattern. They screwed up my whole timing again. I wanted to have both condos finished close together so I can then install the floor heating and have the concrete slab poured in both condos on the same day. But now, when knowing that I'll be wasting more time repairing the botched taping, it's not happening. But I can't start repairing it now. I now needed to finish the last condo first, and then I'll come back here to deal with it. And I'm not hiring any more contractors either. I'll finish the goddamn taping myself. Okay, so by the time they've been working in condo number 2, I've been finishing installations in condo number 3. Again, I finished all the metal framing, all the plumbing and electrical, and of course all the ducts and ventilation unit. And on January 30th, I started hanging drywall in there too. I've been moving quickly. On February 6th, I had another load of sheetrock delivered, but I realized that the batch is defective. All the edges been cracked and been breaking off in my hands while carrying it inside. So I had to call the supplier and requested to take it back and swap it for another load. I even drove back to the supply store myself to make sure the new load was good and I could continue working. Other than that, the work itself been going smooth. I hauled ass again and I had the entire condo covered with drywall in just 18 days. By February 18th, the drywall's been hanged and I needed a little break from work to regain some strength. I needed to mentally prepare myself for more of the endless mudding and taping. Hanging the drywall itself is not that physically challenging, but it's the constant moving the sheets and carrying them upstairs, balancing and placing them to the right spot while being in awkward position like in the foyer. That's what wore me out. I've decided to not hire anyone anymore for the taping and rather do it myself to avoid any further complications. So I took a couple of weekends off and exercised for the purpose of rejuvenating my body, especially my hands and my carpal tunnels. Just needed to stretch my body for a few times by hanging on the high bars at the outdoor workout place. So I continued taping and plastering in condo number 3. I needed to finish the foyer in there first so I could dismantle the scaffolding to be able to work on the floors. So I taped and mudded everything, including all the difficult to reach areas thanks to the sloping ceiling. Together with the foyer, I've been also finishing the empty room upstairs to be able to move my dungeon in there. On March 2nd, I started sanding and then I primed the room and I also primed and painted the foyer. Then I also installed the recessed lights at the foyer's high ceiling so I don't need to do it later from ladder. On March 5th, I moved all my stuff from one room to another so I can finish taping that room as well. I also needed to delete the sill from underneath the skylight window in that room because sometimes during the process of metal framing, I've decided to not build those sills underneath all the skylights anymore. And then I also disassembled the temporary scaffolding structure I previously built from some leftover wood. I cleaned up and organized everything again and moved all the tools upstairs so I can start working the floors downstairs. On March 7th, I applied the asphalt primer to the floor quickly, and while allowing it to dry, I went over to the condo number 2 briefly to try to figure out a system for efficiently repairing all the botched corner taping done by the contractor. I thought I would do it the wet way to wet the mud and scrape it off, but this created too much mess, so then I've decided I'll do it the dry way just to sand it off with the coarse sandpaper. On March 8th, I welded the asphalt liner down to the concrete floor to compute the moisture barrier barrier separating the damp basement from the rest of the house. And right after that, I assembled my new hot wire saw for cutting the thermal insulation styrofoam blocks and finally started laying them down. After I'll have all that styrofoam down in both units, I can finally relax and not worry about a random Ministry of Environment inspection, confirming that everything that the fund's been reimbursed for is done and installed. On March 10th, I started setting the styrofoam blocks down in a thin layer of sand, which evens out the rest of the high points. In the beginning, I had some difficulties with it and I couldn't figure the goddamn thing out. But then I realized I had to set in each block individually, not the entire row at once. So I kept ruining my knees and patiently worked on it till I had the entire condo done in 4 days. The floor is now perfectly leveled and ready for the underfloor heating PEX piping. I stretched out the reflective foil over the styrofoam, and on March 14th, I started rolling out the PEX pipe for underfloor heating. I started in the master bathroom and then continued in the kitchen. You see there's 5 separate circuits and the length of each circuit must not be greater than 100 meters or 328 feet. And 3 days later I had it all done. The PEX pipe been rolled out in all the rooms downstairs, including the foyer, but then I had some trouble with the manifold installation. One of the seals kept acting up. I couldn't get it to stop leaking. Eventually I found the problem with the O-ring being too stretched and loose, thus skipping out the groove and over the seal, and that's why I was unable to tighten it. Once I had the floor ready, I called the concrete contractor and scheduled the pour. Then I moved over to condo number 1 and started working on adding the 2 layers of acoustic drywall. Having the 3 layers of drywall on each side between condo units 2 and 3 proved to be sufficient acoustic separation, so I'm being confident that this improvement in here is final. The new owners have moved in by then and live there with their little baby girl. I was glad that they allowed me to do these improvements considering this fact. They already had new laminate flooring in there and everything. They also worked as IT specialists at a home office, so I needed to do it quickly, make sure the dust is managed and I don't bother them too much. So I started with cutting out the wall stringer trim around the stairs on March 18th. In order to be able to get up the high wall in the foyer, I needed to erect the scaffolding in there again. Simultaneously with working on unit number 1, I also started repairing the botched taping in unit number 2 on March 21st. I sanded everything down to reduce all the excess mass and reveal the bad taping. For now, I needed to fix the foyer's corners first so I can dismantle the scaffolding as well. Some corners been so bad I had to rip the tape completely off, sand everything down to the drywall and retape it again. The rest of the corners I just repaired locally. I inspected every single corner with a flashlight inch by inch and I cut out all the sections that had not been applied correctly or bubbled up. I've kept switching between the 2 condos back to back to save some time. So while I've been waiting for the mud to dry up and harden, I worked next door on the acoustic improvements. On March 28th, I had the acoustics done in condo number 1 in the foyer and the room upstairs, and I started taping and mudding it too. Then after the sanding and painting will be finished, I need to remove the scaffolding so the owners can reorganize the furniture to make room for me to finish the improvements in the living room as well. The next day, on March 29th, the floating concrete slab been poured in condo number 3. The concrete contractor crew brought their concrete pump, rolled out the hose and been done pouring the mixture within an hour or so. Quick process that was. Now I need to let it cure for 48 hours before setting a foot on it. The foyer and the room upstairs in condo number 1 been done by April 6th. The 2 layers of additional acoustic drywall's been taped, mudded, sanded, caulked, primed and painted. Then I was able to finally dismantle the scaffolding and carried all the wood back to the condo number 3 to store it there temporarily. At the same time, I finished repairing the botched taping in the foyer in condo number 2. Finished mudding the rest of the ceiling too, sanded it, primed and painted it, and also installed the recessed lights. And after that, I could take that scaffolding down too. Sometimes during this time, something work unrelated unrelated happened to me. I bought a new SSD external hard drive, but the hard drive was faulty and I lost tons of footage. I've lost about 2 terabytes of recorded time-lapse videos from my project that can be never retrieved. Lost forever. I had the last concrete pour scheduled for April 13th because it's been the only available time the contractor could do it, so I needed to hurry up with preparing the floor for that to make it on time. So I primed the existing concrete floor with asphalt primer again, and after letting it dry up, I welded the asphalt liner again to complete the moisture barrier between the damp basement and the rest of the house. Then for following 6 days, I continued with laying down the thermal insulation styrofoam blocks into a thin layer of sand, and on top of that, I installed the underfloor radiant heating. For the last time, I rolled out the PEX pipes in all the rooms in 5 separate circuits and connected it to the main manifold. I was able to finish this 1 day ahead of the pour, so I also had enough time to pressurize the system and test it for leaks. Finally, all the floors are done and I no longer need to keep thinking of that Ministry of Environment random inspection. After the concrete got poured on April 13th in condo number 2, I needed to allow for it to cure, so I switched back to condo number 3 and started working on the staircase in there. I've had the butcher block slab delivered and I cut the stair strut pieces out of it. I also cut the rest of the trim too, the risers, stringers and runners, sanded everything, routed the edges, painted and stained it, and applied durable polish. It took me 5 days to prepare the stairs. Simultaneously with working on the stairs and between the coats of paint, I've been also working on the last acoustic improvements in the living room of condo number 1. I installed the last 2 layers of drywall in there and I taped and mudded it. I needed this to get wrapped up ASAP as well. I've worked hard to wrap up this whole project soon, put the remaining 2 condos up for sale and get paid. I could already see the long anticipated end of this infinite project in the distance, but all these repairs and improvements added more delays, so for now I just needed to keep patiently grinding. By April 18th, the stairs in condo number 3 been assembled. All the treads, landing and trims been screwed down to the frame, and I even applied an acoustic tape underneath the treads to minimize the foot traffic noises being transferred to the neighboring unit. But I still needed to add a couple more trims later on and then fill in all the screw holes and repaint it white with 2 additional coats after sanding. Also, the acoustic improvements in condo number 1 been finally completed by then. I caulked, primed and painted everything and installed all the receptacles back. Everything except putting the stringer trim back around the stairs been finished, and the acoustic separation between condo unit 1 and 2 should now be satisfactory. On April 20th, I entered the last drywall stage in condo number 2. I started repairing the rest of the botched corner taping, so I went ahead and started sanding everything down to reduce all the excess mass again. And again ripping some tapes completely off, sanding the plaster down to 0 and retaping it back too. I inspected inch by inch of every single corner with a flashlight and cut out all the sections that had not been applied correctly or bubbled up, and retaped and remudded everything. I felt like this was never gonna end. By April 23rd, I had all the tapes repaired, muddied over, and prepared for finish coat downstairs. I needed to do the downstairs first to make sure I have it ready before the wood for the last set of stairs gets delivered. I was gonna repair the rest of the botched taping upstairs after the staircase was put together. The upstairs is gonna be even more challenging too because of the very thick layer of finish coat been applied over the corner tapes to hide all the bubbles. It's gonna be lots of sanding, fucking nightmare, never ending clusterfuck. By April 27th, the finish coat is finished downstairs. It took me 4 days to apply it. My arms and shoulders are worn out and my right wrist is dead. I then waited for a couple of days to let it dry up thoroughly, and on April 30th I started the worst job ever again, sanding drywall. This job is driving me nuts because it creates terrible toxic dust, the white hell. I utterly hate it. I'm always using quality face mask, always make sure it seals properly around my nose and mouth, over my beard that I trimmed a bit, I also wear a hoodie so the dust doesn't get into my hair and ears. And this is what I look like after the job. I look like I'm wearing a drywall superhero face mask. By May 3rd, I had it all sanded and detailed downstairs, caulked the corners around the doors and primed the master bedroom so I can store the wood for stairs in there. And then I had the butcher block slab delivered again for the last set of stairs and started cutting it in pieces. The same procedure repeated as in previous 2 units. I cut all the pieces, the treads, the risers and stringers. I sanded all the pieces, routed the edges, primed it, painted it, stained it and polished it, and then installed it. 5 days later, the last staircase been finished, one by one, till it's done. The spring's been in a full swing and my backyard's been looking good and healthy too this year because I used some quality fertilizer. I needed it to look nice for the listing pictures and for showings. By May 9th, the stairs are all in, ready for filling in all the screw holes, sanding, caulking the corners and repainting, but I'll do all that later. For right now, I needed to finish repairing the botched corner tapes upstairs so I can prime and paint the whole place. There's still a lot more work to get done before I can list it for sale. So I started sanding the inner corners, and during that activity I noticed that even most of the outer corner beads are installed incorrectly. They've been curved or sunk in. I couldn't believe this shit. Yet another delay. Jesus Christ, terrible work by the previous contractor I've hired and fired. Some of them corner beads been so bad that I had no other choice than to rip them out and reinstall them again. I couldn't just leave it like this. What would the people say? So I've been sanding like crazy for 2 days, all the bad mudding, repairing the taping work upstairs and creating lots of dust. I replaced some of the outside corner beads by the skylights and repaired door opening heights on all 4 headers upstairs as well. You see, I made this mistake during framing the upstairs where I forgot to add 2 inches to the headers from the top because I had 1 top plate less than downstairs. Thanks to this mistake, I framed all the upstairs doors in all 3 units wrong. Alright, so by May 16th, all the repairs are pretty much done and everything looks good. The upstairs is now retaped and remudded and ready for finish coat. Oh yeah, and by the way, the grass looks just perfect. So for the next several days, I continued applying the finish coat upstairs, and by May 22nd, it's all completed. After 13 days of hard work total, repairing the inner and outer corners, retaping and remudding, the upstairs is now properly ready for sanding. By May 27th, I had the entire middle unit sanded, detailed and primed. And just 2 days later, I put up the for sale sign at the front of the house. I've been actively working with my real estate agent for some time on listing this unit up for sale soon. And while it's listed, I would finish the rest of the jobs, like all the electrical installations and the front steps. So on May 30th, I started preparing everything for the front steps and pathways. I dug a few inches down in the ground by hand and cut some of the scrap wood to build the forms. I calculated the steps height and leveled everything with unnoticeable slope away from the house. I opted for the concrete pathways instead of pavers to have it done quickly and ready for sale. For finishing the steps, I was gonna use prefabricated concrete wood like treads, and for the risers, I was gonna use the same stone veneer that's been used on the foundation perimeter. Then on June 2nd, I had the premixed concrete delivered to my house in a dumpster, had it placed in the shade under the trees to avoid drying up, accelerated under direct sun exposure, and started mixing and pouring it right away. I only had limited time to work this wet premixed concrete mixture before it dries up and becomes useless. I needed to move quickly so it doesn't go to waste. At 7:30 in the morning, I started mixing it by hand, adding water to it to achieve required consistency. Not too thick, not too wet. Very early in the process, after just a couple of wheelbarrows, I realized I cut myself a task too large to swallow. I started panicking that I'm not gonna make it. Mixing this whole pile of concrete by hand and pour all 3 pathways and steps within 4 hours simply can't be done. What do I do? What do I do? I'm gonna need some help. Unfortunately, I had no one to ask for help, so I had no other option than to just keep working and hope I'll be able to work through this pile of mixture before it starts drying up and harden. So I'm running back and forth like crazy with the wheelbarrow across the road from the dumpster to my house and pouring concrete. The sun is up, it's getting hot, I'm sweating my ass off and I'm getting exhausted. My hands are getting fatigued and my whole body doesn't want to do this anymore. But I can't stop until it's all mixed and all the forms are filled up. The pressure is on. I kept desperately checking my watch with every load and my adrenaline was through the roof, but in the end I was indeed able to mix the whole pile of concrete on time. I filled all the pathways and the steps, leveled it nicely and brushed it with the broom. And I also finished the edges with the curved edging trowel I ordered online a few days prior, and it arrived during the day, right on time. I even had a little bit of mixture left for finishing the top around the basement access shaft opening. I was able to use almost all the concrete I had delivered. My pre-calculation for the concrete volume been right on the money. There's been only a negligible amount of the dried up mixture left. I was done in 6.5 hours of hard labor without a break by 2 p.m. Thirsty, hungry, exhausted and ready to die, but I was happy I was able to finish this overwhelming task in such a short time. If I've decided to use pavers, it would have taken weeks, but with concrete I had it done in just one shift. Okay, so I let it harden overnight and the next day, June 3rd, I carefully removed the forms from around it. The pathways are looking good, but I'm noticing the steps are looking very oddly different sizes. Hopefully I measured everything right. Now I needed to let it cure for a while and then I'll apply the finishing stones and treads to it. I needed to move back inside again for now. The goal was to finish the middle condo ASAP so it can be shown to buyers, and then while it's being sold, I can take time to finish taping, mudding, painting, etc. the last condo. Spring is gone and summer is approaching. This is gonna be the last summer about to get spent working on this project. I can't wait for wrapping it up because it's taking way too long. So I started working on all the electrical installations in the middle unit on June 6th and proceeded with installing all the electrical boxes. I've also decided to install all the circuit breakers in the breaker box myself this time. I've already gathered all the necessary information I needed for this installation. I couldn't rely on the electrician anymore. So I went ahead and purchased all the required components for both remaining breaker boxes and was ready to take on this challenge too. For the following few days I've been making mess again with cutting all the holes and having all the boxes and components laying around. By June 9th I had all the receptacles and switches installed in the whole unit, and then I needed to finally put the breaker box together so I can start installing and testing all the lights as well. So I prepared the circuit breakers layout, labeled the cover properly too so I know where goes what, and then I stripped all the wires. The next morning on June 10th I drove to Brno City to pick up the treads for exterior front steps. They are made of stained concrete with wood grain-like texture. Upon my return I jumped right into putting the breaker box together. I organized and labeled all the wires properly, connected all the ground wires and neutral wires. Then I started bringing all the load wires to specific locations of the circuit breakers according to the labeled cover I printed before. And then I continued connecting all the circuit breakers one by one until I had all 3 rows in by the end of the day. I actually couldn't believe that I was able to put this breaker box together in just one day, except for some finishing touches like connecting the night lights timer. But compared to the electrician I hired before for the first condo's breaker box, I've done exquisite job. That guy took 2 weeks to complete the box and left me with just half-assed job. So I was very happy with my result. It was actually a piece of cake and I couldn't wait for doing it again in the last condo unit. Alright, as for the electricity, I brought it inside the breaker box through the outside socket from unit number 3 temporarily so I can power it up and test everything. Following couple of days I spent by painting. I painted all the ceilings a second coat so I can install all the lights, and I also painted all the walls to make the condo unit appear more finished for showings. The future owners will still need to repaint it to their preferred taste. And I also installed all the ventilation vent covers. Then on June 12th the first thing I installed was the fireplace because I wanted to see what's it gonna look like when I turn it on at night. I wanted to absorb the atmosphere. For following days I continued with electrical installations. I organized all the network wires in the multimedia box, installed a power supply for the remotely controlled skylights and installed the doorbell as well. Everything's been tested and operational. And then I proceeded with installing all the recessed lights, room by room, light by light, downstairs and upstairs. By June 14th, all the recessed lights been installed and tested. Everything works. The condo number 2 is now alive. I also installed some remotely controlled LED light with adjustable light warmth in the kitchen and also a chandelier in the entrance foyer to enhance the wow factor for the buyers upon entering the place. I also installed the attic steps for comfortably accessing the additional storage space and ventilation unit for replacing the air filters, and also installed a light up there in the attic. On June 15th, I installed all 3 radiators upstairs, and then on June 17th, I finished dressing up the front steps with treads and stones. And then finally on June 18th, the big day has come. The middle condo unit is listed for sale. After all this time and all those overcome obstacles, the day is finally here. Now that the wheels are finally spinning, I can focus on them finishing touches in condo number 2 and then start completing the last condo. So I installed the last trim boards around the staircase, caulked all the corners, filled the screw holes, sanded it, repainted it with 2 additional coats, and also finished painting the rest of the walls above it. On June 21st, I installed the remaining night lights, all the CO2, motion, and humidity sensors for the ventilation unit are installed, as well as the control touchpad. All the electricals are now finished. And at last I removed protective plastics and tapes and cleaned the door frames from the tape glue residue. The middle condo unit is now officially completed and ready for showings. But the project is still not over yet. It is now finally time to move to the last condo and start finishing that one as well. Mudding and taping, sanding and white hell for the last time. The last push of this project. I just need to hang in there and keep working. If everything goes well, I should be finished by the end of this summer. Condos are now listed for sale, middle condo is showing, and in the meantime I can work at a comfortable pace till I eventually wrap it all up. On June 24th, I started preparing everything for mudding and taping, and again I repaired the height of all 4 door openings upstairs. In this condo, I've also decided I'm not gonna be taping the inner corners using the paper tape, but I'm just gonna caulk them. I've seen it done before, so I just wanted to test it and see for future reference if caulking the corners is gonna be a crackless solution in such application. I've had rather slow starting to finishing the last unit, but by June 25th, I had all the outside corner beads installed and I started mudding and taping. I also needed to get back to condo number 1 briefly to finish the trim around stairs as well as the baseboards in all the rooms. So I've worked on that simultaneously with the mudding for quite some time. I needed to fit all the little pieces back together I tore down from around the stairs before, replace some of the damaged ones with new ones, and detail everything. Lots of cutting, hole filling, sanding, caulking and painting. As for the baseboards, after a few pieces screwed in, I've decided to just glue those down. I wanted to save me some work by no need for the screw holes getting filled and then sanded and painted over everything, because that would take me forever. Even with these significant time savings, it wasn't until the end of July I finally completed all the works in condo number 1. So by the end of June, I had most joints taped downstairs and upstairs in the last unit. I also taped the sloping ceiling corners in all the rooms upstairs. Every time I needed to work in the bathroom upstairs, I needed to remove my temporary shower curtain and then put it back after I was done that day so I could take shower. I just needed to keep working at a sustainable pace and give myself a time for regeneration, so on the weekends I'm exercising and riding my bicycle around nearby dams. I've had everything taped and mudded to coats by July 11th. Summer is coming and it's suddenly getting hot inside the house to a point when I needed to purchase a portable air conditioning unit to cool my dungeon room down so I can get some sleep in there at night. As for the showings in condo number 2, there's been only 2 so far with no interest. On July 12th, I quickly sanded the base coat over to reduce any high points and I started applying the finish coat. By June 17th, I had the upstairs done and I moved downstairs. In the middle condo, I had the downstairs finish coat done in 4 days before, but because I've been working a lot slower now, it took me 16 days and I didn't get it done until August 2nd. It felt like the mudding will never end. I keep balancing the work with working out so I don't get worn out. In the meantime, the neighbors had their air conditioning unit installed, but I wasn't quite happy with the location of the condensation unit. Them installers decided to just stuck it right in the middle of the south side wall. I remember being pretty angry that they have not consulted the placement of this unit with me. I expressed my frustration to them, explaining that the exterior envelope of the house is a common property and they need to consult any alterations to it with the owners of the other 2 condos. They just fucked up my flawless facade without any hesitation. What an eyesore. Anyway, moving on. On August 3rd, I'm starting sanding all the drywall. The last white hell. I've gotta just brace myself and just do it for the last freaking time. Sanding took longer too. I finished sanding walls and ceilings by August 11th and then I sanded the details and corners by hand. There's no showings in condo number 2. After sanding, I started priming the walls. By August 23rd, I had all the corners primed and caulked twice. I'm curious if this technique is gonna hold. And I continued priming the rest of the walls as well. But I had this ongoing problem with the rollers that I wanted to resolve for good. You see, every time I purchase new paint roller, it's been always different level of bad quality, causing me being unable to paint evenly and quickly. So I've been trying different types of rollers over and over till I eventually found one that was least fucked. In between the jobs, I keep maintaining the grass. Everything's been primed by August 29th and ready for cutting all the holes for recessed lights and electrical boxes for the last time. I'm running low on the cash reserve too. At this point, I have only $10,000 left. I have already purchased all the electrical components I needed and I don't have much work left to do, so the money I have should be just enough for me to finish everything and still have some change left to live off of till the middle condo sells. Or at least I hope so. I started thinking that maybe purchasing the BMW was a mistake and I should have used the money differently. I could have purchased the little apartment instead because I should also consider moving out the house. But now I'm not sure if I'll have enough money for that. Another moneyless adventure is coming my way, I guess. I'm afraid I'm gonna end up selling my car prematurely again. On August 30th, the gas contractor guys showed up and installed the gas water heater in the middle condo. The summer is over and I'm not done with the project just yet. The middle condo has no showings and no offers. But no worries, I'm sure that eventually I'll get there. One day it'll happen. Back in the last condo, the works continued with painting the ceilings so I could install the recessed lights, and then on September 4th I proceeded with assembling the third and last breaker box. The same procedure repeated as before, except I decided to make some breakers positioning changes. For one, I needed to place the main switch to the opposite side of the bottom row because of the main power supply wire location, and second, I lowered the nightlights timer from the top row to the middle row for better accessibility for programming. I assembled and organized all the network cables in the multimedia box too. I installed the power supply for the skylights again, and of course I couldn't forget the doorbell as well. I actually bought these doorbells a while back when I've been searching for one for the first condo. I found these online being sold at like 70% discount, so I bought all 3 of them. These can be used as wired or wireless. They have 3 button inputs and each button can be programmed with different melody. By the different melodies you can tell if someone's ringing at the front door, back door, or a fence gate. I'm making mess again with all the electrical components, wires and boxes everywhere for one last time. By September 7th, I have all the electrical boxes installed and ready for all the switches and receptacles. Then I continued with installing all the switches, receptacles and lights. To relieve my stress and stay fresh and focused, I keep staying active on the weekends. On September 11th, I proceeded with painting, but I keep battling those bad rollers. They're just driving me nuts with the lack of consistency. By September 13th, I moved my dungeon room again. I moved all my furniture and stuff to the other bedroom so I can finish painting that bedroom too. On September 14th, I installed the last set of radiators upstairs, and following day I pressure washed the terraces. Remember me saying there's a lot of dust pollution in this town? Those terraces been so dirty I couldn't even tell the original color. Black shit is coming down on us from these guys here. Even my ventilation filters are getting clogged with this black stuff fast, and they need to get replaced often. To save me some money, I started washing them instead of ordering new ones. I know I'm getting finally close to the end of this never-ending story because on September 21st, I finally got to install the last set of attic steps. After putting those in, I also completed the electrical wiring up there. I installed an accessory outlet, light and associated switch. Only a few last tasks and I'll be finally done. By September 23rd, I had all the electrical installations done, including the fireplace, staircase nightlights, all the ventilation system sensors and a touchpad. I also installed all the vent covers. Everything looks good. Them caulked corners seem to hold so far, but I'll keep monitoring those. Now I just needed to finish the staircase. So that's what I've been working on for the rest of the month and then some. I filled in all the screw holes, sanded it, caulked all the corners and repainted it 2 coats again. Then I also painted the rest of the wall above it. I had it done by October 4th. In between the coats, I also finally painted the access door to the main natural gas shut-off valve. I painted it gray so it blends in with the foundation wall stonework. And I also installed some pendant lights at the foyer ceiling to complete the look. Oh yeah, and I nearly forgot. I still needed to repair the bird-damaged facade from a year ago. So I climbed up the tall ladder again to see what needed to be done about this large cavity the woodpecker carved out inside a styrofoam. I figured I'll just fill the hole gradually with the spray foam, then cut the top off to follow the curve of the damaged arch and then apply the stucco over it. Luckily, I kept some leftovers from before. Finally, the hole is repaired and it's barely noticeable it's ever happened. Alright, so the long-awaited end is here. I just need to remove the protective plastics from the doors and clean up the residue again, then clean up the whole place and move out. After 4 long years, this project is finally done. Now I just need to cash it out, forget it, and move on. Miraculously enough, even my future accommodation been resolved. Near the end of my project, I found myself a girlfriend. She's lived 3 houses over with her now ex-boyfriend, and we moved in together to her new rental apartment only few days after I finished on October 13th. Right on time. I was glad I could vacate the house. I moved all my furniture and tools to the garage, and both remaining condos been now available for showings. Speaking of showings, nothing's been happening, so I dropped the price down and scheduled for an open house. But only one young couple showed up. The main reason for lack of interest was that the inflation's been way up and mortgage interest rates rose too. I've been anxiously waiting for the situation to get better, but I made my peace with that nothing's happening for the rest of the year. Let's just hold the price there at about $240K a piece, remain patient and hope for better times in spring of next year. I believe that soon these remaining 2 condo units will find their new happy owners. So this goddamn project triplex is a wrap. Even though I suffered a lot on this house, I know that this story is part of something bigger. Also, creating this story and going through 4 years of footage took forever, but life doesn't stop for it and new events keep happening as we speak. The very most important thing is that I was able to finish this project despite all the obstacles and delays, and I stayed on top of it. It is time to get redeemed for my efforts. So this is it. Stay tuned for future updates.